Back when I was in high school, I remember that one time we were going to have a planned lockdown drill. I remember that we would have these about once or twice a year. Sometimes they would even tell us like the day before that we were having a drill. I think that was so nobody would be alarmed by it and worry that it was real. So on this one day, I knew that we were having a lockdown drill during the 5th period, which was the last one of the day. The drill would usually consist of an announcement, and then the teachers turning off the lights to their classroom and locking the doors. Sometimes they would make the students huddle in the back of the classroom. Other times we would just sit in our desks. My last period of the day was usually pretty boring, but I did have one of my best friends in that class, Ryan, with me. This particular time, I remember that after 4th period, Ryan said that we should skip 5th period. At this moment, we had both completely forgot about the lockdown drill. I just remember that I knew we weren't doing much in the class, and so did Ryan. It was basically like a work day, where we would just work on homework assignments and stuff. So being immature high school kids, we decided to skip class and head home early. We went to our lockers to get our stuff, and took our time as the bells sounded, indicating that class was now in session. We were in no rush, because the school was not super strict, and we figured we could just walk right out. After we left our lockers and started down a hallway, I remember that we heard the lockdown drill announcement. That's when we both remembered it. We figured that for the drill we had better not be out in the hallway, because a hall monitor might see us and make us go to class. Plus, we were sort of far off from the nearest exit doors to the school, so we decided to go find a bathroom until the lockdown drill was over. However, on the way there we soon heard footsteps behind us. We turned a corner and didn't look back, assuming it to be a hall monitor, so we walked faster and then turned another corner. When we did this, it sounded like the footsteps behind us were going faster as well. We quickly made our way to a bathroom and then went inside. Ryan went in one of the stalls and I went in another. We didn't close the doors to the stalls, but they stayed mostly closed on their own. Then we stood on the toilets so our feet couldn't be seen on the ground. A few moments later, we heard footsteps quickly approaching outside in the hallway. Whoever it was actually entered the bathroom, which caused me to be very nervous, and I'm sure Ryan was as well. We just stood there as quiet as can be. The person then entered the bathroom very briefly and then walked out pretty fast. It was like they just looked in really quick to see if anyone else was inside of it and then continued on. Now, Ryan and I both left our hiding spots a little bit quick. Probably like 10 seconds later we had left the stalls and started to walk out. When we left the bathroom, we noticed that the person was still in the hallway. It was a man, and he had made it almost to the other end of the hall, and he was walking facing away from us. But we realized that this likely was not a hall monitor. He was wearing just a black jacket and jeans, which is not something that a school employee would wear. After we got out into the hallway, we noticed the man stop and then start to turn around. Ryan and I both quickly went in the other direction of the hall and then turned the corner. We started walking down the next hallway very quickly, just trying to get away from the guy. As we continued though, we soon saw someone else up ahead. This was a teacher that we both recognized. It was Mr. Herbert, and he saw us and asked us why we weren't in class, saying that a lockdown drill was going on. We told him that we were sorry and would go to class. As Mr. Herbert walked with us, escorting us to our classroom, we told him about the other man in the hallway. He didn't seem to have any idea who we were talking about and said that he would find out. Soon we got to our classroom and were led inside. And several minutes after that, there was another announcement stating that the school was now having a real lockdown. Several times they said that this was not a drill anymore. This lockdown lasted for about an hour until it finally ended and the school got out at about the same time. We learned that the man we had seen in the hallways was not supposed to be in the school, and he was arrested for trespassing after hiding in the school. Nobody knew what his intentions were. I think it's really crazy how he just happened to be there during a lockdown drill. Did he somehow know we were having a drill and did it on purpose so nobody would suspect him or notice him? I don't really think so, but it makes for a crazy coincidence. I'm also really glad that he didn't look farther into the bathroom where Ryan and I were hiding. We both learned a valuable lesson that day not to skip class, and I don't believe either of us ever skipped again after that. I remember my first ever school lockdown that I was a part of. It happened my freshman year of high school, and I was about 14 years old. I was sitting in geography class, and the teacher told us that there was a lockdown and it was not a drill. I remember that he locked the door to the classroom and then turned out the lights, and we were told not to get up from our desks. Now, nobody knew what the lockdown was for, but very quickly kids started to speculate. Nobody seemed to think that it was that serious, and most kids were just joking around. They were saying things like the school probably got locked down because a man was seen jaywalking nearby. Most people thought that the city our school was in was pretty boring and nothing crazy would happen. I personally was very curious, but I was also not too concerned and figured that it was nothing really that bad. As more time went by, us kids were talking a lot, and the teacher told us to be quiet a few times. The lockdown ended up lasting quite a long time. The more time went by, the quieter the classroom became, and the more worried I became. After over an hour, it was finally lifted. I remember feeling very relieved. We had just one class left for the day, and I remember noticing several police officers standing around in the hallways. The final class period went by pretty normal, and then we were let out of school for the day. I continued to see several police officers throughout the school, and out front were a bunch of police cars next to the buses, and more officers standing outside. I still didn't know what the lockdown had been for though, but the police presence made things feel safer, but it also made it seem like something serious was going on and they were trying to protect the students. Now, I personally did not ride the bus home because I lived in a neighborhood behind the school. It was like a 10-minute walk past the school grounds and through another neighborhood to get to mine. So after school, I went around behind it and then went past the tennis courts and football field. Then there was another field before some grass and trees and residential houses. When I made it off school property, I walked down the sidewalk past these rather large yards to the houses there. One of the yards had quite a bit of trees in it and was basically a woods. I remember that as I was walking home and passed by this, I saw a man who was sort of hiding behind a tree. I noticed him and he noticed me as well. He looked very suspicious, and I instantly wondered if he had something to do with the lockdown. I tried to just ignore him though, and I kept walking. Luckily, he did not try to follow me or anything. I was able to make it back several minutes later and then arrived home from a crazy day of school. At this point, I was home alone because both of my parents were still at work, and it was like this on most days. They'd usually get back a few hours later. So I was hanging out around the house, and like an hour after I had gotten back, I was in the kitchen, which is at the back of the house. I remember looking out the back window to the yard. Just when I did, I saw a man come into view walking into the backyard. The yard was completely fenced in and was not very large, but we had a few trees and a shed back there. The man walked around the yard and then went behind the shed between the wooden fence. I recognized the guy to be the same one who I had seen on the way home from school. I was very creeped out by this, and I felt like the right thing to do was to call the police. So I went over and dialed 911 and reported the guy. Thankfully, he hadn't seen me looking at him through the back window. I kept an eye out back as I waited for the cops to show up. The guy stayed hidden back there between the shed and the back wooden fence the entire time. After police went out to him, he briefly tried to run away before he was caught. The police stayed at my house for a while, and my parents soon got home. I ended up finding out that that man was wanted. He had been seen inside of our school and had entered without permission. That's when the school went into a lockdown. The man fled the school and was able to get away from police. After it was confirmed that he was not on school grounds, classes resumed, but with heavy police presence. They were also searching for him in the nearby area, and that's when I had seen him behind the tree, and then in my own backyard. That was a really crazy experience, and I'm glad that everything turned out okay. I'm a school teacher, and this is the story of something that happened a few years ago. Looking back, I feel bad about what happened, and I wish I had done a better job handling the situation, but I've learned from my mistakes. So, I was teaching second period English class, and I had a class of about 20 students in it. My room is on the upper level of the school and about halfway down a hallway. This class in particular was mostly juniors and seniors and was a well-behaved class. So I was teaching the class and then was going to give them some time to work on an assignment. After I started to let them work, I realized that I needed to get more worksheets and had run out. So down the hallway from my classroom there was a printer in the teacher's lounge, and I told the class that I would print off some more. I would only be gone for a few minutes, and then I left. I went down the hallway and then logged onto the computer in the lounge and found the assignment and started printing them. I was the only one in the lounge at this time. After being gone for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I heard this sound come over the school intercom. At first, I didn't know what it was, but then I realized that it was a lockdown announcement. As soon as I heard this, I remembered my students. I knew that I needed to get back to the classroom immediately, and I quickly left the teacher's lounge. I literally started running down the hallway to get back to my classroom. When I got there, I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I was very confused and didn't know why. Soon though, I figured that the students were maybe following lockdown protocol and had locked the door. I started knocking on the door and tried looking in the window, but could only see the front part of the classroom, which was empty. Still, nobody was answering. I didn't know why, and after knocking a few more times, I called out, announcing myself. Then, I saw some guy come into view who I did not recognize. This was no student, but a grown man. He looked at me and then moved out of sight. Just after that, I heard a voice at the end of the hallway. It was one of my students. He yelled my name and said that I should get away from the classroom. I went over to him at the end of the hallway and asked what on earth was going on. My student told me that while they were in the classroom, some random guy just entered out of nowhere. He demanded everybody get out of the room immediately, so they did. All the students basically ran away, and the school quickly went into a lockdown. All this took place while I was printing papers, and I was completely unaware. The students had gone to other classrooms to take cover during the lockdown, so I went with the student to another nearby teacher's classroom. Meanwhile, police entered the school as well, and were able to locate the man who was still inside of my classroom. He locked himself in and tried barricading himself inside by blocking the door. Eventually though, the police were able to get him to come out. I don't really know what his intentions were. I felt terrible for leaving my students and then the man entering the room. Since that happened, I've never left students alone in a classroom. When I was in high school, something really strange happened one time. Early on in the school day, I remember that I was in class and I left to go to the bathroom. This was something that happened all the time. I left the classroom and started walking down the hallway. When I was nearing the bathroom, I remember that I came across this woman who I assumed to be a teacher. She looked sort of professional, and we kind of crossed paths in the hallway. I had never seen her before though, and knew most of the teachers in the school, so I thought that maybe she was a sub. When I was walking by her, she asked me where a certain teacher's room was. I can't remember the name that she said, but it was a name that I had never heard before, and like I said, I knew most, if not all, the teachers in the school. I told her that I didn't know, and then I kept walking. I made my way to the bathroom and went inside. After being in there for like a minute, I left and went back out into the hallway. Right when I started walking back though, I heard the announcement for a lockdown over the school speakers. I started walking faster to get back to my classroom. A short time later though, I ran into the woman again. She was walking in the hallway and saw me once more. When she noticed me, she said that I was not supposed to be out in the hallway. She very confidently told me that I needed to come with her and to go to her classroom for the lockdown. I started to say that I was going back to my own classroom that I had been in, but she interrupted me and said no, I had to go with her. So at that point, I just said okay and started following her. She started to walk very quickly and we went down the hallway. At first, I couldn't believe how fast she was walking, and I was trying to keep up with her. I really didn't want to go to her classroom, but she wasn't giving me an option. So we went down 2 hallways and she kept looking back at me like she was trying to make sure that I was still following her. Then we headed to the west wing of the school, which I was very familiar with. It was really just the gym and athletics area of the school, as well as some lockers and offices. There weren't really any classrooms over there. So at this point I was very confused and also suspicious, because I knew this woman did not have a classroom over here. The longer I followed her, the more I got a bad feeling that got worse and worse, like I shouldn't be following her and I needed to get away. Then, one time when she wasn't looking back at me, I decided to just go back. I stopped and turned around and then just started sprinting back to my classroom. As soon as I did, the woman stopped and then started to chase after me. I ran as fast as I could, and at first the woman was right on my tail, but I was a lot faster than her and quickly able to pull away. I kept going and then made it all the way back to my classroom. I started banging on the door like crazy until I was let back in. I told my teacher about what happened, and she made a call to the offices. A while later, when the lockdown was lifted, I found out that the very same woman who had tried to get me to follow her was the cause of the lockdown. She had entered the school by breaking a window to an empty classroom. I'm not sure what exactly she wanted. She was not a substitute teacher at all, but was posing as one. Why she wanted me to go with her, I do not know, but I'm really glad that I followed my instincts and ran away, and that was the only lockdown in my high school career. It was crazy, and I'm glad that nothing like that happened again. I remember one really scary experience that I had back when I was in high school. I was a sophomore, and I used to ride the bus to and from school every day. One day, there was a pretty typical day of school. I went to all my classes, and nothing strange or unusual happened. When the last bell of the day rang at 2:45 p.m., school was out and we could go home. I remember that this time was always crazy and would be a mad dash to get to the bus on time. A lot of kids went to my school, and in between every class the hallways would be packed. So after school it was always really tough to walk through the halls. And the buses left at just after 2:50, so you only had 5 minutes to get to them. On this day, I left my classroom and made my way to my locker. I had to go there to get something before going to the bus. This proved to be a mistake, because after literally running through the hallways and getting outside, I saw that I had missed the bus. I was really disappointed, because I lived too far away from the school to walk home. I also didn't have any good friends with cars, so I would have to wait for my mom to get off of work and give me a ride. Fortunately for me, my mom got off of work at about 3:30 or 4 p.m. usually, so I would only have to wait at the school for about an hour or so. So after calling my mom, I went back inside of the school, not really knowing what I was supposed to do. I had never missed the bus before, and had never stayed after school unless I had a sports practice. When I went back inside of the school, I saw that there were only a few students still inside, mostly just upperclassmen who drove themselves. Within probably 10 more minutes, the hallways became completely empty with just me walking down them. Now, my school did not really have any places to hang out at all. There were no study areas or couches or chairs set up. It was just hallways and classrooms, really. So I figured that I would just walk the halls while I waited for my mom to come to the school. I remember that I walked the halls for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I made it towards the back end of the school, and things were completely empty. Then I heard this sound come over the school speakers. It was followed by an announcement that there was a lockdown and that this was not a drill. At first, I was very confused. I didn't know that there would be lockdowns when school was not in session, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to do in this type of a situation. Obviously, I was not in class and didn't have a classroom to go to either. I looked around at the classrooms that I was passing by, and all their doors were closed and they seemed to be empty. I kept walking, thinking maybe I would just leave the school altogether. That's when I came around a corner, and way up down the hallway, I saw this guy wearing all black and a ski mask on his head. I knew that something was up there, and I quickly went back around the corner. I saw the bathrooms and quickly went inside them. Once I was there, I stopped and listened to see if the person would go near. I figured the bathrooms were really the only place I could hide for the lockdown. For a minute or two, things were pretty quiet, and I didn't hear anything. Then I started to hear footsteps not far out in the hallway. They didn't really get that close though, but seemed to be a ways away. Moments later, I heard a very loud banging sound, like someone was smashing the lockers or something. I didn't know what exactly it was, but it made me feel on edge. These sounds went on for a while. Then, after about a minute or so of quiet, I heard more loud banging followed by the sound of glass breaking. It was from a ways down the hallway, but I no longer felt safe hiding in the bathroom. When things quieted down a little bit again, I knew that I needed to get out of there. I carefully went to the entrance of the bathrooms and looked out into the hallway. I didn't see anything, indicating that the sounds I heard must not have been within my sight. Then I quickly left the bathroom and ran the opposite direction to where I had heard the noises. I ran all the way until I got to the front of the school. When I got towards the lobby, I saw a police officer. He seemed a little bit surprised to see me, but I quickly told him how I had seen a guy in a ski mask and stuff. Another police officer who had entered the school told me to go outside the front door and they would handle it. I went out and there were several police cars. I waited there while the police went inside, and my mom got there a little while later. I was able to go home with her, and there were a bunch of police cars still there and the police in the school at that point. I went home and heard about the rest on the news. The police had ended up finding a guy inside and catching him. The man had simply walked inside the school wearing a ski mask after hours. Obviously it was suspicious, and he got reported. I guess he went around and caused a bunch of damage to the school, breaking windows to several classrooms and breaking other equipment as well. That must have been what I had heard. It was a very scary situation, and I'm glad that I was able to get out of it. A couple of years ago, I had to go to the airport one night to pick up my sister. She was flying in from Detroit, and the flight was supposed to land fairly late. I think it was like 10 or 11 p.m. or something like that. However, her flight ended up being a little bit late. I arrived at the airport somewhat early, but my sister wasn't back yet. I went and parked the car in a parking lot and then went inside of the airport. When I got inside, I found the time that my sister's flight was now supposed to land, and I had about 20 more minutes to wait. So I went over and sat down. By now, the airport was very quiet. There were just a few people walking by here and there. As I sat down and waited, I remember that at one point I saw this woman randomly walking up to me. When she approached me, she asked me how to get to the city from the airport. Now, the city was like 5 minutes away, so I told her, and it was pretty easy. She walked away after that in another direction. But then the woman stopped, sort of near another sitting area, but did not sit down. I wasn't really watching her, and I mostly went on my phone. A while later, though, I looked up to see the woman just staring at me. She was standing in about the same spot. Now, she was a long distance away, but there was still no mistaking that she was looking in my direction. I found it really odd. I looked away, though, and focused my attention back on my phone. The woman continued to stare at me, though, because the next time that I looked up, she was still doing it. I didn't know why. I had thought that she had to get to the city. After all, she had asked me for directions, but now it seemed as though she just wanted to stare at me creepily. I just ignored it for the most part, though. Soon my sister's flight had landed. I got up and walked over to go wait where the bags would come out. I walked a little ways away and located it. Then I stood around for a while and waited for my sister. A short time later, she came out and got her bag, and then we started to leave. As I was walking away, I saw the woman in the airport again, still staring at me. I thought it was weird, but I just ignored it. I looked away and left the airport with my sister. We walked out of the airport and went towards the parking lot. I remember that when we got to the parking lot, I looked back and noticed that the woman who had been staring at me was now in the parking lot as well. She was walking behind us a good distance back. I was very confused now. Who was this woman? Why did she keep staring at me? And what exactly was she doing? She seemed to be walking sort of fast, and as we were walking to the car, I told my sister about the woman. The parking lot was very large, so it was kind of a long walk. As we continued, my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to just ask the woman. I stopped and turned around to face her. Then I started to take a couple of steps towards her. As soon as I did, though, the woman stopped suddenly. Then she turned around and sprinted away in the opposite direction into the end of the parking lot. It was so weird. I stood there watching until she went out of sight, and I had no idea what was going on. But then I just continued with my sister towards the car. We eventually got there, loaded my sister's bags in the back, and then got inside. As I started to drive away, though, I was still in the parking lot, and I noticed this car come driving sort of fast into the lot. It went in front of me, and I caught a look at the driver. It was the same woman. I could not believe it. She was driving a pickup truck and drove around my car sort of recklessly. She ended up driving around and going behind it, and I left the parking lot hoping that she would keep driving the other way. But this woman screeched her tires and quickly turned around. As I left the parking lot, she started to follow me. I drove down the road, leaving the airport with the woman still behind me. Soon I turned, and the woman turned as well. She drove behind my car down the next quiet road for some time. We were about the only two cars out because it was very late at night. When I turned onto the next road, the woman made the turn very wide. She ended up going off the road and sliding a bit before hitting a tree in the grass and crashing. The crash really was not that bad, but I pulled over and stopped to call the police. After crashing, the woman got out of her truck and then went into the woods nearby. I was very confused. The police arrived at the scene fairly quick, and I told them what happened. They searched the woods and pretty quickly located the woman. We were able to go home after that. I later found out that the woman was high on drugs. She obviously should not have been behind the wheel of a vehicle, and that explained her reckless driving. That also explained why she acted so strange. Something really weird happened to me a couple of years ago. It all started for me one day when I had a flight. I travel a lot for business, so I'm very much used to flying and being in airports. One day I had a flight from Atlanta to Baltimore. I boarded and got on the plane to my seat, which was a window seat sort of towards the front. A short time after I got to my seat, a guy came up and sat next to me. He looked pretty average for the most part, and nothing about him stood out. I gave a sort of hi when he sat down, and he did the same. Then he just sat there, and neither of us said anything to each other. The flight was really not that long. It was like an hour and a half or so. The man didn't say anything the whole time. He just sort of sat there, not that I was watching him or really paying attention. When the flight landed, we all got off and went into the airport at Baltimore. I had a ride coming to get me, but it got delayed, so I had a little bit of time at the airport. I went into a coffee shop, got inside of it, got a drink, and then sat down with my laptop. After being there for nearly 30 minutes, I looked up from my laptop randomly to see the guy who had been sitting next to me on my flight. He was sitting on the other side of the coffee shop at a table. I figured that it was a coincidence and thought nothing of it really. A while later, my ride got there and I got up and left. The next day, I was still in Baltimore, and I was at a restaurant in the morning getting breakfast with a coworker. The restaurant was in the city, and we were sitting sort of in the back. There were a decent amount of other people there, but I remembered that I randomly looked up towards the front and saw the same guy. It was the man who I had seen on my flight and in the coffee shop. Plus, this man was not at the restaurant with anyone. He seemed to be by himself, and he was facing me. It seemed pretty suspicious, but it also could have just been a coincidence, but it would have been a pretty crazy one at that. I'm not a shy person or anything, so I decided to go talk to him. I was really curious as to why I kept seeing him. I got up from the table and walked right over to him. The man looked surprised to see me at first. I told the man how he sat next to me on the flight, and he was at the coffee shop with me and now here. At first, the man actually denied it, but I knew it was him. After telling him that I knew it was him, and I wasn't even talking angry or anything, I asked him sort of jokingly why he kept following me around. I remember the man paused, and then he looked at me and said, "Because I like to stalk people." Obviously at first I thought he was joking, but the way that he said it was very serious. The man then said that he'd been watching me since the flight everywhere I went. I thought that it was really weird what he was saying, and I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I said, "Okay, well, you can stop following me around now." The man did not say anything. His behavior was very strange to say the least. I just walked back over to my coworker and then told him all about what happened. None of us knew what to make of this strange man. Before leaving, we looked over and the guy was still there. When we walked past him to leave, I stopped and said to him, "I'm leaving now, so don't follow me." I was careful to look behind me after getting onto the sidewalk outside of the restaurant. I made sure the guy wasn't following me, and he didn't seem to. Later on in the day though, we had work stuff to do, and I was busy. I pretty much forgot about the guy who had been following me, and I also didn't see him. That night, I got back to my hotel room and went to bed at about 10 p.m. However, before I fell asleep, I heard a noise. I was just lying down in the bed, and all the lights were off. The only sound to that point was the very quiet noise of the TV, which the volume was barely above mute. I then heard a knock from my hotel door. I really didn't know why anybody would be knocking on my door so late. Then I heard a voice. I couldn't make it out at first, because whoever it was not talking very loud. I got up from my bed and walked a little closer. That's when I heard it clearly. It was a man's voice, the same man who had been following me around. He was saying my name and then telling me to open the door. The way he said it was really creepy. It was almost like he was playing a game. I wasn't sure what to do at first. I looked through the peephole, and sure enough, the same guy was there. Then I decided to call the front desk and report him. As the guy was still in the hallway outside my door, I called and let the hotel know what was going on. Then I did my best to ignore the man. I couldn't sleep, and every so often he would knock on the door again. I just sat on the bed and hoped that the guy wouldn't do anything crazy. A while later, I heard some other voices in the hallway. Soon the knocking stopped and the man was gone. After that, I was able to go to bed. The next morning, I found out that the police got involved. The man was knocking on my door and hotel staff asked him to leave. He did leave, only to come back about an hour later. At that point, the hotel called police on him. That time, the cops got the guy to leave. I didn't see the man for the rest of my trip, and thankfully, I haven't seen him since. I don't know why that guy followed me. It seems really bizarre to do that, and maybe something was wrong with him. I just hope that I never see him again. Last year, I had to pick up a friend from the airport. I didn't really mind it too much because I don't live that far away. It's maybe a 15-minute drive. The most annoying part really was that the flight landed at 6 a.m., so I had to get up pretty early. When I drove to the airport, things already seemed pretty busy there. The airport usually is. I went on one of those long roads where you pick up or drop off people. Cars pull over really fast and then leave. It can be kind of hectic sometimes, and it certainly was on this day. So I found a spot by where my friend said she was coming out. There was a car a little ways in front of me, and right after I pulled over, a car came and pulled up behind me pretty close. I texted my friend that I was there, and just moments later, I saw her come out of the doors. She came up to my car and put her bags in the back. Then she got inside the passenger's door. Right as I was about to put the car into drive, this car came up really fast and then turned right in front of my car. It parked extremely crooked, halfway in front of my vehicle and halfway to the side of it. It was the most careless parking job I've ever seen. There was another car parked a little ways in front of me, so I guess they wanted to squeeze in between us. The car stopped and someone got out of the passenger's door and headed towards the airport. The driver stayed in. I was a little bit annoyed at the borderline reckless move. However, I figured it must be a quick drop-off and they would be on their way. Except, the person did not leave. Meanwhile, the car behind me wasn't leaving either. I was completely boxed in. I sat there just waiting for over a minute. I didn't know what the person in the car in front of me was doing. There was a guy in the driver's seat and he appeared to just be sitting there. I honked at him so I could get out. That's when I saw the man who was behind the wheel look over at me and give me the bird. This made me real angry and I honked again loudly. However, he did not leave. He just sat there. Just then though, the car behind me finally started to leave. After it did, I backed up and turned to go around the man who was parked crooked. However, just after I passed his car, I saw he suddenly backed up and then started to go forward. He was now driving behind me. This enraged me even more. It meant he literally could have left whenever, but he was carelessly blocking me in for no reason. As I drove out of the airport, the car followed. He got really close to my back bumper, and I was a little worried that he might try something. That's when my friend had a good idea. She said that if the guy followed us out of the airport to go to a police station. I didn't know where one was, so she looked one up on her phone. As we left the airport and went on another road, the guy behind me did as well. He was still following very close, and I had a bad feeling about it. We got the directions to the police station and started following them. Over the next several minutes of driving, there were several times where I was sure the guy was going to bump my car with his. Thankfully, he didn't though, but he got very close. Eventually, we made it to the police station and turned into it. The man did not. However, he slowed down significantly and yelled something out of his window, but I couldn't hear it. Then he screeched away, squealing his tires in the process. We reported him to the police, but I'm not sure if anything could really be done. Then we drove back. I dropped my friend off and was able to get back to my place without a problem. Thankfully, nothing like that has happened since, but each time I go to the airport, I think about that crazy experience. This happened several years ago. For some background, I'm a female, and I was flying back home one time. I remember that I had visited a friend who lived in another state. I got to the airport and was waiting for my flight to board. When I arrived, it was about an hour before boarding time, so I had some time. I sat down in the area where my flight was waiting. After a little while of sitting down, I decided to get up and get something to drink. I found one of the airport stores and then went inside of it. When I was there, this man walked up to me. He had long dark hair, a slight beard, and was on the larger side. He came up to me and said hi. I didn't know who the guy was, but I said hi back to him. That's when he said I was good friends with his sister. I had never seen this guy before, and I asked him who his sister was. He paused for a moment and then said Molly, but I didn't know anyone named Molly, and I told him that. The guy must have me confused with somebody else. He said he was sure that he knew me. From that point on, the guy wouldn't leave me alone. He started asking me about where I was headed and when my flight was. I told him because I didn't see the harm in it, and I was polite. He asked me if I wanted to get some food at the restaurant with him before my flight, and I said no thanks. After I got the water that I wanted at the shop, I went and checked out. The guy was basically following me the whole ways. I remember I asked him where he was going, and he said his flight was for California, I think. Then I told him to have a nice flight and goodbye. I then started to walk back over to the boarding area. The guy did say bye to me, and I made it back without him following me or anything. I sat back down and continued to wait for my flight. I remember a while later, right before my flight was about to board, I saw the guy again. He came up and walked over towards me. I was confused as to why he was there. Then he told me that he was going on my flight. I really couldn't believe it. In fact, I didn't believe him. I was so confused that I didn't say anything at all. He went on to say that his flight got canceled and so he bought a ticket on my flight. The only thing I said was why. He said because he wanted to. I had no idea who this guy was or why he thought he could just do whatever I did. He sat down next to me, but I got up. I told him that I was sorry, but I was not interested in hanging out with him or anything. The guy didn't say anything. I went and stood closer to the counter waiting to board the plane. Eventually, we boarded. Thankfully, I did not have a seat next to the guy. I was really worried about that. He was sitting way in the back, and I was a lot closer to the front. The flight took off, and we flew back to my hometown. I had actually forgot about the guy during the flight, because I watched a movie and I also fell asleep briefly. After getting off the plane and walking through the airport again though, he caught up with me. He tapped me on the shoulder, and when I turned around and saw him, I remembered, giving me a bad feeling. The guy then asked me if he could stay at my place because he didn't have a hotel or anything yet. I told him no. As we walked through the airport, the guy followed me. I had a friend coming to pick me up, and I called to let her know that I was there. When the guy continued to follow me as I approached the doors, I told him to stop following me or I would report him. He didn't say anything. When I left the airport though, he was still there. At that point, I just took off running. I located my friend's car and sprinted to it and got inside. I told her to quickly drive away. I looked back and saw the man actually running in our direction. My friend didn't know what was going on obviously, but when she saw the guy running towards us in the mirror, she left. We were able to safely get away before he reached us, and I told my friend the whole story. Since then, I haven't seen the man. Looking back, that was just a really crazy situation. I have no idea why that guy seemed so obsessed with me. I had truly never seen him before that day. The fact that he actually bought a ticket on my flight blows my mind. I'm glad that I haven't seen him since then. A few years ago, I had a flight back home. I was flying from Dallas to Chicago, and the flight back was pretty nice. The story really begins after we landed. My flight landed sort of late, at about midnight or so. Afterwards, I walked through the airport and then waited for my ride, which didn't take too long. I got picked up at the airport by my friend, and after driving me back, she dropped me off at my apartment. It wasn't too long of a drive because I lived fairly close. After getting back, I went inside. I was tired from the long day of travel, and it was really late, so I pretty much just got ready for bed at that point. Afterwards, I looked on my phone before getting in bed, and I saw that I had a missed call. I didn't recognize the number, and was wondering why somebody would call me so late. Just as I was looking at it, they called again. I was curious, so I decided to answer it. I said hello, and on the other end at first, I just heard breathing. Then, I heard a woman speak. She said that she was on my flight from Dallas to Chicago, and now she was outside of my apartment. I didn't know if I should take this serious or not, but I was very confused to say the least. I asked her who she was, because I did not recognize the voice. The woman did not tell me. She just said that she wanted me to let her inside, or she would break in. Then she hung up. This really creeped me out. I went over to my front door and looked out of it, but didn't see anybody. I had no clue if this was some kind of a prank or what. I looked out into the hallway both directions, but still saw nothing. For a while, I thought that the woman was going to call me again. I was pretty nervous, and I wasn't tired anymore. I stayed up for several hours, and nothing happened. At that point, I decided to just block the number. After that, I was able to go to sleep. The next morning, I got up, and things were fine. Nobody had broken in or anything. However, when I left my apartment, I saw that there was a sticky note on my door. I looked at it, and it was simply a frowning face. I thought that had to be left by whoever that woman was. I was very creeped out. However, nothing more happened after that. I didn't get any more strange calls or people at my door. I don't live in that apartment anymore either. That remains a sort of mystery to me of who did that and why. I'm hoping that it was just a prank, but I really don't know.
I stumbled across the link on a Craigslist psych discussion forum. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just killing time scrolling through threads on lucid dreaming and conspiracies about subliminal messaging, and then I saw the post. Live feed, smiling man, watch if you dare. It had a single link, no description, and a sense of weirdness that kind of pulled me in, and against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The stream loaded quickly, revealing a man sitting in a plain wooden chair in the middle of an empty room, and the lighting was flat and harsh, giving the whole scene a very clinical vibe. He was staring directly at the camera, unblinking, with the kind of smile you'd expect from someone trying too hard in a family photo. It wasn't quite unsettling at first, it was just kind of strange, and I waited for him to do something. A wave, a twitch, a shift in his seat, anything. But he didn't. He just sat there, his wide eyes locked on the lens, his lips frozen in that eerie grin, and I checked the timestamp. It was live. I remember thinking, well, this is weird, while glancing at the chat window. It was empty, no viewers except for me, and curiosity kept me from watching. Now 5 minutes turned into 10, and then 20. He didn't move once. No blinking, no fidgeting, nothing. It was like he was frozen in time except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. The longer I stared, the more unnatural it felt, as if he were daring me to keep looking. And then suddenly, I heard a noise. At first I thought it was my imagination, but it grew louder, a faint creak like footsteps on old wood. But the man didn't react. The sound got louder, footsteps echoing faintly in the stream, coming from somewhere out of view. A shadow flickered across the far wall of the room and my stomach tightened. Someone was there. Someone else. I leaned closer to the screen and my pulse was quickening. A figure appeared, blurry at first, and then cleared as they moved cautiously into the frame. It was a man, dressed in dark clothes, wearing a ski mask, and he was holding a sledgehammer. The intruder didn't seem to notice the live camera at first. He glanced around the room, gripping the hammer tightly, and then froze when his eyes landed on the smiling man. But that man, he didn't move an inch. His grin didn't falter and his gaze didn't shift. The intruder hesitated, his posture stiffening. He took a step closer, waved a hand in front of the smiling man's face. Nothing. And then he whispered something, low enough that I couldn't make it out. The smiling man stayed silent, and he didn't even blink. The intruder backed away slowly, muttering to himself, and then turned and bolted out of the frame. I heard the sound of a door slamming shut somewhere off-screen, and for a moment the room was quiet again, except for the faint hum of the camera. The man didn't so much as flinch. I closed the tab, but the image of his frozen, smiling face stayed with me long after. I never went back to that stream, but sometimes I wonder how many people have found it since, and who's really watching who. I remember being 8 years old and my dad bringing home our first home computer. I have very vivid memories of how excited he and my mom were and how Dad let me use MS Paint to get me accustomed to using the mouse. It seemed like a big deal to them, but it was like a positive thing, you know, something they were excited about. But then when we finally got hooked up to the internet, that was a big deal in a whole different kind of way. My dad treated the computer like it was a gift from the gods and the key to the 21st century, which I guess in many ways it was, kind of. But he treated the internet like it was a loaded gun. I later learned that an uncle had warned my mom about how the internet was full of very dark stuff that had warped my young mind. And while I'd say that that statement had a whiff of hyperbole about it, I can't say it's completely false either. Maybe 6 or 7 years later, when I was finally allowed to surf the internet unsupervised, I discovered a little website you may know as Craigslist. I'm sure like 90% of people know what Craigslist is, and if you don't, you better just Google it or something, but I wasn't revisiting the place for the sales or the personals. I was returning for all the weird info dumps and discussions taking place in the psych and religion sections of the discussion boards. And that's when I discovered the single most disturbing thing I had ever read online. The story of a little girl named Anna, and how even though I thought my uncle was an old prude, making mountains out of molehills, He was actually kind of right about the whole internet being full of weird and very disturbing stuff. So back in 2007, a young Czech man set up one of those video baby monitors in order to check up on his newborn son. But then one night, he switches it on, and instead of seeing his kid asleep in his crib, he sees a boy of around 6 or 7 bound and gagged in the corner of a dirty cellar. Naturally, the guy rushes to call the cops, who deduce that he somehow received the signal of a similarly video-based baby monitor located in a nearby home. The cops then go door to door, trying to figure out where the signal was coming from, and that's when they meet the Morova sisters. The older of the two sisters was the single mother of 2 young boys and had recently adopted a 13-year-old girl named Anna. It was one of those 2 boys the young father had witnessed tied up in the basement. It was a form of punishment, but not one devised by the boy's mother or aunt. It was little Anna's idea, the 13-year-old girl adopted by the older Morova sister. But Anna had not just been manipulating the sisters into brutally punishing the boy. She had been cutting off thin slices of his flesh and then feeding them to the unwitting sisters in their daily meals. And at first, the police believed Anna was just another victim of the sisters' abuse. Yet oddly, the girls didn't show any of the same signs of abuse that the boys had, be it burns, bruises, or scars. The 2 boys confirmed it too, only they were ever subjected to abuse and Anna remained untouched. Somehow, Anna had convinced the 2 boys that they deserved to be punished, which was why they never thought to fight back or otherwise defend themselves. The same was true for the 2 sisters. Somehow, Anna had convinced them that what they were doing was the right thing to do, and neither of them had a history of being abusive until little Anna had showed up on their doorstep. Little Anna was adopted, all right, but the Morova sisters hadn't visited an orphanage or contacted some kind of adoption agency. Little Anna had simply turned up on their doorstep one day and had never left. The cops do some digging on little Anna, trying to find out where she came from, then, after months upon months of searching, this is what they discovered. 13-year-old Anna was not 13 years old. She wasn't even named Anna. She was actually in her early 30s. Her name was Barbara, and the only reason she could pass as a young girl was because she had some rare developmental disorder. The cops moved to arrest the woman only to find that she'd fled the country. But thanks to them being able to circulate recent photos of her, she was quickly tracked down and then brought back to the Czech Republic to face justice. It turns out she was in Poland, posing as a 14-year-old boy, and she'd already talked her way into the home of a young family who had, you guessed it, 2 young children. On the Craigslist discussion board, there were all kinds of rumors that Anna's birth parents were connected to some weird cult called the Grail Movement. But even as a teenager, I found the connection to be odd at best. The only thread that held them together was the idea that the movement's goal was to create a kind of meta-Christ, essentially a copy of Jesus with all the same preternatural powers. Supposedly, Anna was this meta-Christ, but then without the proper guidance, she turned rotten and used her powers for evil. The Grail movement was a real thing, and a serious enough movement that the National Socialists went after them after they annexed Austria. But I think people just wanted to tag the 2 subjects together to make the whole thing into some vast, creepy conspiracy, when to me, the whole thing is just scary enough on its own. These days, I think back on it, on what my uncle said about the internet being full of weird, creepy stuff, and I think he's partially right. But it's not the internet that's packed with all of those strange, frightening things. It's the world outside of our windows. Real life. The world and the people in it. Those are the really scary things. All websites like Craigslist do is kind of act like a window, which allows all of us to see it, truly. Way back before I moved out of my parents' place, my little cousin spilled Mountain Dew all over my PlayStation and just totally fried the thing. A few hours later, I was scrolling my local Craigslist when, bingo, I see a PS3 for sale for $100. The Post said it was in good condition, and the seller claimed that he needed the money urgently. It seemed too good to be true, but since it was the holidays and everywhere was mostly snowed in, I was bored out of my mind and I was desperate. I texted the number listed, and the seller replied quickly, suggesting that we meet in the parking lot of the closed-down Kmart on the edge of town. He insisted on cash and stressed the need for a quick transaction because he didn't want to be sitting in his car freezing his butt off. I felt uneasy. I told myself that I'd be careful. As long as I saw the PlayStation 3 before handing over the money, I figured I'd be fine. When I pulled into the lot, it was completely empty, aside from the dark car parked at the far end, and a man in a hoodie leaned against the driver's door. He raised a hand in acknowledgement as I approached and then asked if I had the cash. His tone was casual, almost bored, so it didn't raise any red flags at all for me. I nodded, and then he motioned toward the backseat of his car, saying the PlayStation 3 was there and inviting me to check it out. I stepped out of my car, walked towards his, and then opened the back door. Inside was a box, but something was off. It wasn't sealed, and when I lifted the lid, it wasn't a PlayStation 3. Instead, it was an old, dusty console that looked like it hadn't worked in years. And before I could react, I sensed the guy stepping closer behind me. Then out of nowhere, he pulls a gun from his waistband and tells me to hand over the cash, or I'm dead. The whole time his voice was low and controlled, and he didn't sound remotely nervous. But I felt like I was about to piss my pants as I reached for the envelope in my pocket. As I turned to hand it over, I caught sight of another person in the driver's seat of his car, crouched low and watching very intently. This wasn't just a bad deal. It was a straight-up setup. And when that hit me, it hit me like a punch in the face. I had this gut feeling that they weren't about to let me leave and that the guy's next command was going to be for me to get into his car. Instead of just handing over the money and staying put, I tossed the envelope into the car, then instinctually just bailed. I threw the cash in the hopes they'd be happy with their $100, but then, looking back on it, who robs someone for just $100? They didn't want the money. They wanted me. And from what they did next, I'm not sure if they cared if I was dead or alive. The first gunshot cracked the air behind me, and then the asphalt kicked up near my feet. I didn't waste a second. I dove from my car, fumbling with my door handle until a second shot followed, louder and sharper and shattering my rear window. I finally got the door closed, started the engine, and then just stomped on the gas, tires screeching as I peeled out of the parking lot as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. When I finally made it home, I locked all the doors and sat in the dark for hours, trying to shake off the shock. The shattered glass in my back seat was a grim reminder of just how close I'd come to something far worse, a near miss that could have ended much differently. Back when I was younger, a little reckless, and eager to find love, I thought it'd be a great idea to check out the personals section on Craigslist. Most of the ads I saw were either blatantly fake or downright creepy, but after scrolling for a while, one caught my eye. It was very short and straightforward. Looking for something casual, just broke up with my boyfriend, don't want anything serious, message me if you're interested. Something about it seemed genuine, and the attached photo sealed the deal. And this girl was gorgeous, like sort of way out of my league, so I decided that I'd send her a message. She replied almost immediately, and things moved fast, really fast, and within a few exchanges, she was sending provocative pictures. And I really couldn't believe my luck, but something felt off, like it was way too good to be true. Now, half joking, I sent her a message, "If this is real, send me a picture with my name written on a piece of paper." And to my shock, she did, and that was really all the proof I needed to know that she was real. We kept talking, and she told me that she wasn't looking for anything serious, just a no-strings-attached hookup. Her ex had just moved out, and she wasn't ready for a relationship. She just wanted to have some fun. She then gave me her address and told me to come over. And to make sure everything was legit, I called her, and she answered on the first ring, and her voice was just as alluring as her photos. She said that she was at home, waiting for me. It all felt like a dream that I was going to wake up from at any second, but it wasn't. It was real. When I pulled up to that address, it was a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house looked normal, with a nearly trim lawn and a long driveway. I called her again to let her know that I was there. No answer. I tried again, and still nothing. I started to feel uneasy, but I was convincing myself that I was overthinking. Maybe she was just in the bathroom or had stepped away from her phone. Trying to shake off the nerves, I got out of the car and walked toward the house, and that's when I saw them. 2 men were standing in the window, staring me down as I walked up the driveway. They each looked extremely sketchy, like they'd stepped straight out of a police lineup, and one had a shaved head and a sort of scowl, while the other was very wiry, with tattoos covering his arms. And my blood immediately ran cold. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out of there, and without a second thought, I turned and sprinted back to my car. My heart pounded as I jumped in, locked the doors, and just sped off. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them chasing after me. When I finally got home, I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, and maybe those guys had nothing to do with her. But deep down, I knew better. About an hour later, I got a text from the girl. "You're a loser," it read. "That was my boyfriend, and we were just messing with you." I stared at the message, feeling a mix of anger and relief. So much for the X part, right? And I tried to brush it off as some sick joke, and they probably got a kick out of scaring guys like me. It was messed up, sure, but at least I was okay, I guess. But a few days later, the local news told a much darker story. A man had answered a Craigslist ad in that same neighborhood, and when he showed up, 2 men ambushed him. They beat him, robbed him, and left him barely alive, and he ended up in the hospital fighting for his life. The police said it was a setup, and in the description of the house matched the one that I had been at, and a very cold chill ran down my spine. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to being their victim. If I hadn't noticed those guys in the window, I might not have made it out, and the thought haunted me for a while. These weren't just pranksters messing around. They were predators, willing to hurt someone for a quick payday. They lured me in with fake promises and a pretty face, and I'd almost fallen for it. Even now I can't shake the memory, the way those men stared at me, unblinking, as if I'd already been caught in their trap. And the relief that I felt when I drove away was replaced by a very sickening realization. I'd been extremely lucky. The man on the news wasn't so fortunate, and I can't help but wonder how many had fallen for that exact same trap. I met him through a Craigslist personals ad. His posts weren't anything fancy, just kind of awkward and sweet, and it said something like, "Looking for someone to grab a drink with, laugh a little, and see where it goes?" And it caught my attention because it felt real. And we started swapping emails, and he came off as funny and kind, maybe a little rough around the edges, but not really in a bad way. Then, after a week of chatting, we agreed to meet up in person. The bar was crowded, but we found a quiet corner to sit and talk, and right away, I noticed that he had this natural charm about him. He was funnier and way more engaging in person than I expected. He made me laugh, and the way he listened and responded made it feel like he'd be a great listener and maybe at some point in the future, a very attentive boyfriend. And as the night went on, he suggested heading to a nearby pool hall so we could continue enjoying one another's company. And I thought, why not? I had driven, so I offered to take him there. At the pool hall, we played a few games and the conversation kept flowing. He made me laugh, so much so that I almost forgot that we'd only just met. And then suddenly, his phone buzzed on the table and he looked at the screen and his face sort of dropped and then everything changed. "I need to tell you something," he said. And I froze, not really sure what was coming. "I'm a convicted felon." and I just got out of prison. And my mind started spinning. I didn't even have time to process that before he said, "And I have a girlfriend. I live with her, but it's not serious. I'm just staying there until I get back on my feet." And I was completely blindsided. This man who had been charming and funny all evening had just thrown all of this at me like it was no big deal. Then he added one more thing. "She just texted me. She walked into the bar earlier and saw us together, and she knows I'm with you." In that moment, I knew the date was over. I wanted to get out of there, but I'd driven us, and I didn't feel right just leaving him stranded. I told him that I'd take him back to his car, but the vibe on the drive was completely tense and uncomfortable. And as we drove, the alcohol must have really hit him because he started crying. Just quiet tears at first, but then it turned into full-on sobbing. He kept apologizing over and over, saying how much he regretted everything, and I didn't know what to say. And then out of nowhere, he reached for the car door handle. And a panic rose up inside of me, and I yelled, "We're on the goddamn highway!" And he didn't seem to care. He was crying so hard, and it was like he wasn't even hearing me. And I hit the child locks as fast as I could. I yelled at him, trying to stay calm, but inside I was terrified. I didn't know what he was going to do next. The rest of the drive felt like it took forever, and he kept mumbling and crying, and I just focused on getting us back to the bar as fast as possible. When we finally got there, I let him out and watched him stumble to his car, and as soon as he was out of sight, I just drove away as fast as I could. I thought that was the end of it, but a few days later I got a message from an unknown number. It was his girlfriend, and my stomach dropped. She sent pictures of her face, bruised and swollen with a split lip, and she told me he'd beaten her up after our date. She'd confronted him about seeing me, and that's how he reacted, and I felt sick. This man who had made me laugh and seemed so sweet at first was a violent monster. I couldn't believe that I'd spent an entire evening with him, laughing and having fun, all while being completely unaware of what he was capable of. His soon-to-be ex-girlfriend and I started talking more and more after that, and she told me all about the things he'd done to her, and it was horrifying. Then not long after, she left him for good, and we actually became friends. It's strange how something so terrible can lead to something good, but I guess that's life. And that night changed me. I learned to trust my gut and pay attention to those red flags. If something feels off, it probably is. And looking back, I can't believe how close I came to being another one of his victims, and it serves as a reminder to be careful and to never underestimate what someone is capable of.
My story isn't crazy long, but it's one of the wildest things that's ever happened to me. I still think about it now and how close I came to getting ripped off by people I thought were my friends, so here we go. It was a Friday night a few years back. I was supposed to go out with Ethan, Marcus, and a few other buddies. Just some bar hopping, nothing major. But that afternoon, I got hit with something nasty, fever, chills, full body sweats. My stomach twisted itself into knots, and the thought of even standing up, let alone drinking, made me want to puke on the spot. I shot Ethan a text and told him I'm out for the night. He hit me back with a laughing emoji, called me soft. I told him to have a drink for me and crashed on my couch, with Netflix playing in the background. I must have dozed off because the next time I looked at my phone, it was well past midnight. My fever had eased up a little bit, but my body still felt wrung out. The TV flickered in the dark, some show playing I can't even remember putting on. I barely even had the energy to sit up, so I just let my eyes unfocus, sinking in and half out of sleep. And then I heard this metallic scrape. At first, I thought it was the TV, some weird sound effect, but when I turned the volume down, I heard it again. And this time, it was followed by whispering outside. My body went rigid, whispering. Low, hushed voices just outside my door. My mind quickly scrambled for some kind of explanation. Was it the neighbors or maybe drunk kids messing around? But then I heard that metallic scrape again, but it was longer this time, like something being dragged across my lock. My stomach quickly turned to ice. I slid off the couch, moving slowly and carefully. The TV cast just enough light to keep me from tripping as I crept towards the front room. I pressed my back against the wall near the window, took a deep breath, and then just barely peeked through the side of the curtain. Two men, dressed in dark clothes, both wearing ski masks. One was hunched over my front door, working at the lock with something thin and metallic, a lockpick. The other stood a few feet back, glancing around, shifting from foot to foot like he was really nervous. My throat locked up immediately. This ain't a prank. This is real. I stumbled back from the window and fumbled for my phone. My hands were slick with sweat as I unlocked it and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, voice steady and professional.
911, what's your emergency?
There's two guys outside my house. I swallowed hard. They're trying to break in.
Can you confirm your address, sir?
I gave it to her, whispering. My body felt electric, every nerve on edge.
Where are they in the house?
Front room. I can see them through the window. I don't think they know I'm home.
Stay quiet. Officers are en route.
I peered back through the curtain, breathing barely. The guy at the door continued to jiggle the knob, muttering something. I could just make out his voice now, rough and impatient. But at the same time, it was familiar. A sick feeling crawled up my spine. I knew that voice. I told the dispatcher, barely even believing my own words. I think I know one of them. There was a pause on the other end.
You recognize him?
I mean, I can't see his face, but his voice? My mouth went dry. Yeah, I do.
Were you supposed to be out tonight, sir?
That question hit me like a slap. I blinked, my brain working slower than it probably should have been. Yeah, I whispered. I was supposed to be out tonight. The dispatcher's tone then sharpened.
It's not uncommon for burglars to plan jobs based on when they know somebody won't be home. You may have been targeted by somebody you know.
A cold weight then settled in my gut. I stared at the guy at the door, his build, his movements, the way he was shifting when he got frustrated. Every part of him was screaming something I didn't want to believe. Ethan. That realization made my skin crawl. My friend? A guy I was supposed to be out drinking with. He thought I wasn't home. He thought my house was empty. The dispatcher kept talking, telling me to stay on the line, but I wasn't listening. I hung up and called Ethan. Outside, I saw his phone light up in his pocket. He froze. The other guy just looked at him, confused. Ethan hesitated and stared at his phone for a second. Then, instead of answering, he sent it to voicemail. My stomach twisted and I called again. This time he didn't even check, just let it ring. I swallowed down the fear and that rage bubbling up underneath my skin. I typed out a text with shaking fingers. I'm home and I can see you. Ethan checked his phone and stared at the screen, and then bolted. I watched him and the other guy sprint down the street, their dark figures vanishing into the night. But they didn't make it far. The second they hit the driveway, red and blue lights flashed and sirens ripped out through the air. The cops were already here. The moment the sirens hit, Ethan and his accomplice skidded to a stop, and for a split second, they looked at one another, then bolted in opposite directions. It didn't matter though, the cops were already fanning out, voices barking commands. Hands where I can see them! Down on the ground now! Ethan hesitated just for a second, then dropped to his knees, hands in the air. His friend wasn't as smart. He made it halfway across my neighbor's yard before two officers tackled him hard into the grass. I stood there frozen at my window, watching it all unfold. It really didn't feel real. The same guy I shared drinks with, laughs with, confided in, was now cuffed, face down on the pavement. A A few moments later, the officers knocked on my door. I let them in, and my legs were still feeling like they weren't attached to my body. I gave my statement and recounted everything that I saw. The whole time, my voice was distant, like I was telling somebody else's story. It turns out Ethan and his buddy weren't first-timers. They were tied to a string of break-ins across the town. Small stuff mostly, electronics, cash, anything that could flip quick. He'd been robbing houses for months and months now, including mine apparently. The reality of it all didn't hit me until after the cops left and my house was quiet again. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and then sat in the dark staring at my phone. I don't really know what I was waiting for. A follow-up for the police or my friends, really anything, but nobody reached out. I sat up for most of the night totally perplexed, half paranoid. It was a really weird feeling. I ended up just taking more cold and flu medicine and forced myself to pass back out. Over the next few weeks, I distanced myself from some of the more sketchy friends I'd made over the years and got all the info I could on Ethan. He went away for a few months, maybe a year, but he's out and about again. He even tried apologizing to me, but I still don't talk to him. Folks like that definitely aren't worth the trouble. I didn't think twice about that night when it started. It was just one of those evenings, that same routine that I'd done 100 times before. I got off work early, one of those rare miracles that really didn't happen very often, but I didn't question it. Picked up Darcy from the babysitter, buckled her up into the car seat while she babbled along about the cool stuff that she did that day. The usual. The house was dark when I got home, the late autumn chill creeping in. Darcy clung to her stuffed rabbit as I carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind us. The house smelled like garbage, adding to the list of stuff I needed to get done. I flicked on the lights and sat her down and shrugged off my coat. I was just about to start dinner when my phone buzzed. Hey, I'm gonna be late, at least another hour. Of course. I sighed, stuffing my phone back into my pocket. That left me alone with Darcy, longer than expected. I guess not a big deal, but I was already tired. I just needed to get the house together. Okay, kiddo, I said, scooping her up. Let's get you set up so mommy can get rolling. I plopped her in front of the living room with a sippy cup and her toys, turning on something animated to keep her occupied. She giggled, completely unaware that my energy was running on fumes. The kitchen was cold, even with the oven on. I moved throughout the motions, chopping vegetables and setting water to boil. That kind of mindless task that you do on autopilot. My phone buzzed again, another text from Tyler. As I typed out a reply, I heard something from the living room, this soft thump. I thought for a second, maybe I dropped a package of pork chops on the floor. No, they were still on the counter. Okay, well, maybe Darcy knocked something over, one of her toys. But then a few seconds later, I heard something else, something closer to a jingle. I turned my head, frowning. All right, something's off. I stood there for a moment, knife still in hand, trying to listen past the sound of boiling water. The house went back to quiet again. No thumps, no jingling. Maybe I imagined it. I shook my head and went back to chopping. Pulse just a little quicker now. Tyler texted me again. I'm sorry, I'm ready to be home. What's for dinner? I started typing back when another sound reached me. Not a thump this time, this kind of whoosh, like air moving where it shouldn't be. I turned my head towards the living room. A breeze? I could feel it now, drifting into the kitchen, sending a cold draft across the back of my neck. I dropped my phone. The front door was open, wide open. The next second was pure electric panic. My stomach flipped. I ran, nearly knocking over a chair. Darcy? My voice cracked as I burst into the living room. Empty. The sippy cup was on its side, dripping milk into the carpet. Her stuffed rabbit lay abandoned near the couch. The front door gaped open to the night, a dark mouth swallowing up my child. I ran to the threshold, heart slamming, eyes darting across the yard. The porch light wasn't even on. Pure black and no Darcy. My brain couldn't perceive or process it. 1 second she was there and the next, gone. I staggered out into the porch barefoot, cold slapping at my legs. I screamed her name into the night. Darcy, baby, where are you? No answer. I ran down the steps and scanned the yard, the driveway, the sidewalk. My pulse was roaring in my ears. Could she have gone toward the street, the backyard? My mind raced through every horrible possibility. And then I heard movement, a rustle from beneath the porch. I spun, breath sharp in my throat. I dropped to my hands and knees, peering through the lattice work. There she was. Darcy crouched against the foundation, wide-eyed and silent. Her tiny hands clutched her shirt, but she wasn't crying, just staring. Baby, I gasped out. My voice was shaking. Come here, come to mommy. She didn't move. I reached for her, trying to stay calm, but then I saw it, the thing in the shadows just a foot away from her. A skunk. Its black and white shape curled tight, tail raised, nose twitching as it watched me with these beady little eyes. The pulse slammed harder. Darcy was trapped. One move from getting sprayed, or even worse, bitten. My hands curled into fists, and I forced myself to breathe. Panic would not help. Darcy, sweetheart, I whispered. Don't move, okay? Just stay still. She just blinked at me, as if waiting for my next move. I twisted around, hearing footsteps, chest seizing up. It was Tyler jogging up the driveway, confusion written all over his face. Jesus, what the hell's going on? He panted out, and somehow I didn't hear him pull up to the house. I pointed under the porch. It's Darcy, she's stuck and there's a... The skunk shifted, and my breath caught. Don't startle it, I hissed to him. Tyler crouched beside me, peering into the darkness. Shit. Slowly, he straightened up and reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his keys. I didn't know what he was doing until he aimed, pressed the button, and set off the car alarm. That blaring sound shattered the quiet. The skunk flinched, and its tails flicked up and then gone. A streak of black and white shooting out from underneath the porch, vanishing into the bushes. Darcy then let out this startled little yelp, and that's all I needed. I lunged forward and grabbed her and yanked her in my arms, stumbling backwards into the grass. She clung to me, her tiny body trembling. I pressed my lips to her hair, whispering, "You scared me so bad, baby." My whole body felt like it had been hollowed out, shaking with the leftover adrenaline. Tyler bent down and checked her face and her arms. She okay? I nodded. I think so. Then that smell hit me, something burning. Tyler's eyes went wide. Dinner. I turned and stared through the open door, smoke curling from the kitchen. The pot on the stove, whatever I was cooking, was now in flames. We ran inside. Tyler grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink while I yanked that smoking pot off the burner. My hands were shaking so hard that I almost dropped it. Flames hissed and died as Tyler let out a blast of white foam, coating the stove, the counter, and half the floor. Smoke curled toward the ceiling. That smell of burned food filling up the house. For a second, nobody spoke. We just stood there panting, Darcy still clinging to my hip. And Tyler let out this short, breathless laugh. Whew. Hell of a night. I wanted to laugh too, but it didn't come. My body was still buzzing from the panic of losing Darcy, from that skunk, from nearly setting our house on fire. I turned and pressed my forehead to Darcy's soft curls, inhaling her scent, that baby shampoo and sweat. We need to check her, I murmured. Make sure she didn't get bitten. Tyler nodded and reached out to brush a hand over her back. No scratches, no blood. We still stripped her down and tossed her into the bath, just to be safe. She was sleepy now, the whole ordeal already fading in her little mind. By the time we got her dried off and into pajamas, she was nodding off in my arms. I sat with her in the rocking chair, staring out the window into the dark yard, my pulse finally slowing down. Tyler walked up behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "He's okay now." I nodded, but deep down I knew. Those 30 minutes were the longest, most terrifying of my entire life. And thank God Tyler just happened to get home a little earlier than expected. Never left that door unlocked again, I'll tell you that.
I've been hiking for a few years now, and one evening I went hiking on a trail I've done before, which I considered my favorite. It's well known for its beautiful views, and I had planned on a simple evening hike. I wasn't expecting it to take too long, so I didn't bring much, just water, a few snacks, and my phone. As the evening went on, the weather turned cooler. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, and I knew it would be getting dark soon. I had planned to stick to the main path, but I decided to take a shortcut that would get me back to the car a little faster. I'd done it before without issue. This time, though, the shortcut led me into unfamiliar terrain. The woods were denser here, daylight was fading quickly, and I had to have made a wrong turn or missed a turn at some point. At first, I didn't panic because I thought I could still find my way, but as I kept walking, I realized I didn't recognize anything. The path was barely a trail now, just some faint markings in the dirt that I could barely follow. My phone had no signal, and when I tried calling for help, it just showed that dreaded no service message. It was already getting darker, and I wasn't sure where I was anymore. Right as it was getting dark, I saw an old shack up ahead of me. It looked abandoned, like it hadn't been used in years, but it also didn't look like it had fallen apart. The door was slightly open, and nobody was inside, so I decided to go in. It seemed like a strange thing to find out here, but at that point, I didn't have many options. I figured I could use it for shelter for the night until morning when I could see the woods better. The shack was small, with old wooden walls. There was some broken furniture, a dusty table, and a few old crates scattered around on the carpet that covered the ground. It wasn't much, but it was better than sitting outside in the dark. I locked the door behind me and settled into the corner with my bag as a pillow, lying on top of the carpet so that I had at least a little padding. Around midnight, I began hearing noises. It was faint, but there were noises now and then coming from below the shack. At first, I thought an animal had made its home under the shack, but as the night went on, I heard a lot of different noises, some louder scrapes, or just overall rustling around. I was confused, but tried to ignore the faint noises as I drifted in and out of sleep throughout the night. It all came together for me when suddenly I heard loud steps ascending towards me in the middle of the night. There was a lower level below me, like a bunker in the ground. As the steps worked their way towards me, I felt a slight push below. I realized I was laying right over the entrance to down below, which must have been a trap door below the carpet that I was laying on. I shouted out hello, kind of out of instinct, and didn't know what else to do. Whoever was below me trying to open the door frantically ran back down the stairs. A few moments later, I heard someone scrambling away into the woods, making a lot of noise as they went. I was a little worried that the person might come back, but I wasn't going to find the trail in the middle of the night, so I stayed. I spent the rest of the night huddled up in the shack, hoping that the morning would come soon. In the morning, before I left the shack, I tried to open the trap door below the carpet, but it was locked, and I couldn't find any other entrance to the bunker below me. There had to be another entrance because whoever was down there had taken off into the woods earlier that night from a different exit, but it was well hidden because I didn't see it. I made my way back to the hiking trail easily. It was easier to figure out where I was going in the daylight, and after a few hours, I was back at the parking lot. I immediately reported what I had found to the authorities, but when they asked for the details on the location, I couldn't give them an exact spot. The area was so far off the main trail, and I didn't really know where it was. I don't know if the authorities ever even looked for the shack and bunker, or if they ever found it. Maybe they didn't take me seriously, or figured it was nothing to worry about. To this day, though, I question myself why someone needed a hidden bunker below an old wooden shack in the middle of the woods for. It must have been some sort of extreme doomsday prep type of person, or someone who was up to no good. One of my last years at church camp when I was a teenager, I got a good scare and learned a good life lesson. I was 14, and my friend Tyler and I had snuck out of our cabin after lights out time. We didn't plan to go far, just a short walk around the campgrounds. We wanted to explore a little, talk about whatever was on our minds, and maybe see if we could scare each other. We were bored. We had spent the whole week at camp doing all the usual stuff like hiking, swimming, and the evening campfires. But that night, we felt like doing something different. We didn't realize how dumb it was until it was too late. We left our cabin quietly, trying not to wake anyone, and walked down the path towards the woods behind the camp. The camp was isolated, with no houses for miles, no streetlights, just trees and a couple of small buildings scattered around. We knew the camp pretty well, but we had never tried to navigate it in the pitch dark. We wandered for what felt like a while, just talking and laughing in the dark. We figured we'd make it back before anyone noticed that we were gone. But when we turned around to head back, we realized the camp didn't look the same. The trail we had followed into the woods didn't seem familiar. The lights from the cabins were not where they should have been, and the shadows from the trees were deeper, like they were closing in. Tyler and I started walking faster, but it only made things worse. The more we tried to get back, the farther we seemed to get. The trail was different. It twisted and turned in ways we didn't remember. The trees looked bigger and the path narrower. It was like the woods were alive, shifting around us. We tried to retrace our steps, but it felt hopeless. By then, we were both nervous. Tyler kept insisting we'd get back, that we just needed to keep walking, but I wasn't so sure. My mind kept jumping to all the creepy stories we heard at campfires earlier in the week. You know, the usual scary stories about lost campers, strange sounds in the woods, and old legends nobody really believes but still makes you uneasy. After about an hour, we stopped. The woods were thick, and the moonlight barely cut through the branches. There was an eerie silence, like everything was holding its breath. That's when we heard something, a noise far off in the distance. It sounded like footsteps, with the crunching of leaves and twigs breaking. Someone was walking, but not in a normal way. It was like they were dragging their feet. We didn't say anything, but we both knew that we had to get out of there. We started walking again, only this time it was with a sense of urgency. It felt like we had to get back before whatever was back there caught up with us. Finally, we saw one of the camp cabin's lights, faint but visible through the trees. We moved towards it quickly, trying not to trip over roots or rocks in the dark. We finally broke through the trees and went back onto the main path, right in front of the main campfire area. By the time we got back to our cabin, we didn't say a word to anyone. Nobody knew we had been gone. I'm not sure what happened out there in the woods that night, but I know we both felt something wasn't right. It sounds fake, but it was the weirdest sensation ever. It felt like the woods were changing constantly, somehow trying to keep us trapped out there. The weirdest part of the whole night was that I had my watch out there with me, and according to my watch, we had been out there for at least an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours. I wasn't sure the exact time we had left, but I know it was for sure over an hour. However, when we got back to our cabin and saw the clocks there, only half an hour had passed. After that, we never went exploring in the dark again at church camp.
I'm a police officer who works in a major city in Australia. I'd rather not say which one. This whole experience started this past Monday, when I was working my station's front desk. Our command is in a pretty rough area, so even around lunchtime on a weekday, the place is packed. Most of the people in the lobby were there to report on bail, and that demographic tends to look how you would imagine. But there was one woman who stood out among the rest. It wasn't just her lack of face tattoos, it was because she appeared to be very nervous. When it got to her turn, the first thing she said was, "I might need to talk to a detective." That's usually a pretty good icebreaker in this profession, and my notebook was out right away. I explained that she could talk to me first, and that I would see what I could do. Cops over here are a bit less jumpy about people pulling black objects out of their bags than they are in the States. Let's not get political, I'm just stating facts. However, I was still surprised when the woman pulled out a VHS tape from her bag and slid it underneath the glass. It took a few minutes for me to get the full story out of her, because she seemed to go back and forth between being utterly horrified, then embarrassed, and kept apologizing for wasting police resources on what she said was probably nothing. Basically, she told me that a couple of months ago, she had been jogging around her area when she passed a whole bunch of furniture and personal items sitting by the sidewalk outside of a house. Judging by how much stuff there was, she assumed it was actually there waiting for a disposal company. and she decided to pick through it and saw a box with a VCR in it. She came back later in her car and took it home. She was going to check to see if it worked and try to flip it on eBay. It ended up sitting on her shelf for 2 months before she finally got around to testing it out. She bought a random tape from a thrift store, but when she tried to insert it, she discovered there was already a tape left inside. I thought it was stupid that she would run out and buy a tape without at least checking the VCR first. I took her into one of the interrogation rooms and had a staff member wheel in one of the TV carts. Some of our training videos for new recruits haven't been updated since the 1980s, and we still showed them on VHS. So we sat down and watched what was on the tape. It was labeled SEC Camera Club. It began with a woman tied to a chair inside of a room. The camera's POV walked around her before coming uncomfortably close to the woman's face. You could hear the camera operator panting heavily throughout the film. Soon, the tied-up woman began begging for her life. The woman who was sitting next to me in the interrogation room, whose name was Jennifer, asked if she could step out into the hall before the next part. I granted her request. What was depicted next still makes me feel sick just thinking about it. There's a chance it could have been fake, but by the way it was shot and the terrified look on the tied-up woman's face, it seemed real to me in the moment. The cameraman pulled out a knife, and you can guess what happened next. The screams I heard on that tape still haunt me. I was shocked. I must have looked like an idiot because I had no idea what to tell her when I came back out into the hallway. In the end, I wheeled the TV into my sergeant's office, and he basically laughed in my face and said that this was all fake. He had been a cop for 13 years and had been to dozens of stabbings, and there was never that much blood. The cranky bastard then got pissed off at me that I had spent so much time watching a horror film when the lobby was still full of people. Even before the pandemic, the sergeant didn't like too many customers waiting around the station. I relayed what my sergeant told me to Jennifer. She was both relieved and embarrassed. I tried to give her the tape back, but she recoiled and told me to chuck it out for her. She didn't want it. I've been doing some independent research on what could have been on the tape. The only thing I can compare it to is a 1978 horror film called Faces of Death. It's a film that is presented as if it were an actual documentary, presenting the viewer with disturbing footage that depicts various ways of dying. The film is tame by today's standards, but was very shocking for its time because of the realistic nature of its presentation. Fair warning, if you love animals, do not look up that film. Now, to be clear, it wasn't a scene from Faces of Death, but I'm wondering if it's something from a similar production. Referring back to my notes from that day, the video was well lit, and the woman and the killer were wearing normal clothing. The walls of the room looked like corrugated iron, perhaps from a shed or maybe a barn. Has anyone ever heard of the SEC Camera Club? There were no serial numbers on the videotape, and my Google searches have failed to unearth any further information regarding this. I'm assuming it must have been from some underground bootlegging company that specialized in selling exploitation films. Or maybe it was a group of amateur filmmakers trying to make this look as real as possible. I'm just guessing here, and I know this is all very scant information to go off of. But if you know anything about this, please leave a comment below. I'm 19, and I live on a farm in a rural area with just my mom and older sister. There are no houses around us, just long stretches of fields and open land. Usually I go out back and do most of the work around the farm myself, while my mother handles the business side of things. My sister works in the city and has an office job. She usually gets home pretty late. One night I was outside fixing the porch light when my sister pulls into the driveway. Going by how late it was and the fact that she looked exhausted, I figured that she had had a tough day at work. But when I went inside the house, I found her talking to Mom in a low, hushed tone. I asked what happened, and my sister explained to me that there was a car following her on her way back home. This car had apparently been following her all week. She said that they would usually tailgate her for a short while and then turn away, but this time, they were tailing her almost the entire way. She took a bunch of wrong turns to lose them, which is why she was so late that night. My mom advised her to inform the police, and I supported that. My sister is capable and all, but she's also too friendly sometimes, and has frequently found herself in situations with creepy individuals. All of her ex-boyfriends have turned out to be assholes or stalkers. She's just too trusting of people at times. Unfortunately, she forgot to copy down the license plate number of the car, so she just gave the police a description of it. It was a light blue sedan, one of the older models. They told her to call it in if she noticed the car again, and that was all that could be done for now. A couple of days went by, and nothing happened. The car had apparently stopped following her. However, a package was delivered to our front doorstep. It wasn't something from UPS or the Postal Service. It was a shoebox. I saw it first when I was heading out to do work on the farm. I opened it to find a video cassette. I popped it into our old VCR. It turns out it was surveillance footage of the front of our house. It started when my sister left for work and stops when she returned home. There was a cut in between. Otherwise, it would have been over 8 hours of footage. I showed my sister when she woke up. She claimed that this was filmed the day before she called the police about the tailgater, going by the weather and the clothing she had on in the video. Obviously, we were all freaked out. She and my mom stayed inside, while I went out to check out the spot where the video had been recorded from. The vantage point was pretty far away from my house. I could only make a guess that it was from somewhere by the edge of the front pasture, but there was no trace of a camera or tripod. Since it was raining the day this video was recorded, any markings in the dirt or footprints had been washed away. We contacted the police again, and they asked her to bring in the tape. They said they couldn't do anything because there was no direct threat, only an implied one, and we also couldn't prove that it had been recorded on our property. The person who sent in this tape was clearly doing it to taunt us. As of the writing of this story, another tape showed up on our doorstep yesterday, depicting the same thing. I'm a female, and I was 20 years old when this happened. At the time, I was a junior in college. I transferred from a local community college to a university a few hours away. Due to a communication issue with the admissions office, I had a very short amount of time to find a living accommodation. I didn't know the area, and I had to resort to looking at Craigslist ads for a room to rent. Thankfully, I found a place near my school and met up with the guy who was renting out the room. It was a large house in a very nice neighborhood. The man's name was Peter. He was in his early 30s, worked mostly from home, and was very polite. Peter also rented out a room to another university student who was out of town until the semester began. When I eventually met the other roommate, he was mostly quiet and kept to himself for the most part. For my first week, I was completely alone in the house. Peter was out of town on a business trip, and the roommate had not returned from his parents' place yet. Not gonna lie, being alone in the house was a bit eerie. It was so large and mostly unfurnished, aside from a couch and a television set in the living room. There was a locked upstairs level that you could only access from an outdoor staircase that was directly outside of my bedroom. The house seemed to have several additions, so the layout was a bit odd. My bedroom was very spacious and had visible wiring throughout the room. The closet had a broken door that was propped up to the side. Peter told me that the previous owners had used it as an office. I checked out the wiring because it gave me a bad feeling, but I didn't find anything suspicious about them, mostly because I had no idea what to look for. Once Peter returned, I noticed a few odd things about him. He would say strange things to me that were vaguely sexual. He also liked to take pictures of me without my consent and post them to Facebook, usually tagging me in them. At first, the pictures were very mundane, such as me sitting on the couch or typing on my laptop at the kitchen table. He would turn the flash off, so I never knew when he was taking these photos, until I saw them online later. The pictures became more invasive over time. There was one of me in a towel when I was in the hallway walking from my bathroom to the bedroom. Another was of me tanning in the backyard. At the time, I didn't know he was home. I found Peter to be strange, and I was uncomfortable around him. But the room was a steal, and the location was good for my school. The other roommate shared a thermostat with me. It controlled my bedroom, his bedroom, and the hallway that led out to the living room. It was located in my bedroom, so I always left the door unlocked for him to change it if needed. One day, when Peter was out of town, the roommate was adjusting the thermostat when he noticed something strange behind one of the wires in my closet. He called me over to inspect it. It looked like a tiny black ball. I didn't know for sure, but it looked like it could be a small camera. So I put a piece of tape over it and considered calling Peter, but I didn't want to accuse him of something that I didn't know was true. So the roommate and I decided that we would ask him together when he returned from his trip. 2 nights later, I woke up from a deep sleep. I was disoriented, but I noticed my bedroom door was open, and someone was moving around inside my closet. I stayed very still and tried to make out who the figure was. As I mentioned, I thought it might have been my roommate adjusting the thermostat, but my eyes had not adapted to the darkness yet. But I could clearly see someone moving from the closet to the open door. The figure left, and I turned on the light to inspect my closet. I saw that the piece of tape that I had placed there 2 nights ago was now missing. I then opened my door and saw Peter walking down the hallway back to his bedroom. I quietly followed him, and after he opened his bedroom door, I confronted him, demanding to know what the hell he was doing in my bedroom in the middle of the night. He jumped when he saw me. He was obviously taken off guard. Behind him on his laptop computer was a grainy video feed of my bedroom, where I could clearly see that my bed was in the frame. Although Peter was a creepy man, he wasn't the confrontational type, and he immediately began apologizing and trying to explain that this wasn't what it looked like. Unfortunately, there was nothing I could do since it was his property, but I covered the camera back up and moved out as quickly as I could. I did file a police report, but I don't want to get into that too much since the case is technically still open, but I finally wanted to get this experience off my chest. I'm not sure how much footage Peter has of me, or if he's posted it somewhere online, or if he ever captured anything worthy of being posted, other than maybe a few nude shots. The other roommate moved out around the same time I did, and the last time I drove by that house was a few months ago, and there was a foreclosure sign in the front yard.
This happened just last summer. I live by myself in what I would describe as a typical apartment. I have 1 bedroom, a bathroom, kitchen, and living room pretty much. It's inside of a building in a fairly large apartment complex. So one night, I worked sort of late into the night at my job. I was really tired from the long day and pretty much just arrived home, took a quick shower, and went to bed. That was around midnight. However, I woke up at roughly 4 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, I wanted to get more sleep, but I was wide awake. I was also very thirsty and felt dehydrated. Sometimes, mostly in the summer, I wake up in the night because of dehydration, and obviously on this night I had worked late and not been able to drink as much. Then usually I drink some water and feel better immediately and then go right back to sleep. But some of the times when I wake up, I'm wide awake and can't go back to sleep right away, and this was one of those times. So what I usually do when that happens is get up and go into the living room and watch TV until I get sleepy again. That might be 15 or 30 minutes usually. So that was what I did on this night. I got out of bed, drank some water, immediately felt better, and then sat on the couch and turned on the TV. My couch is to the right of the front door to the apartment, about 20 feet away. I remember that when I sat down, I glanced over and happened to notice that my door was actually unlocked. I realized that I somehow had forgotten to lock it. Normally, I always remember, but I guess I forget sometimes. I went over and locked the door and then went back to the couch. I started watching TV and waited for myself to feel sleepy again. I was flipping around the channels for maybe 5 minutes when suddenly I heard a noise. Obviously, it was very quiet other than the noise from the TV, but the sound I heard was somebody trying to open the front door to my apartment. I really couldn't believe it, and I had no idea who it could be. I sat and listened, but didn't hear anything else. Then, after a moment, I got up and I walked over to the door. I looked out of the peephole, but nobody was there. Then I opened up my apartment door and looked into the hallway. That's when I saw him. There was a man wearing a hooded sweatshirt walking away from me down the hallway. He was mostly looking down at the ground, and then he went to another door and tried opening it, but this one was also locked. I watched him go to another door and try that one as well. Apparently, he hadn't noticed me opening the door. I didn't know who this guy was, but he was seemingly trying to get into any apartment. As he reached the end of the hallway, he suddenly looked behind him and then he saw me. When he did, I quickly closed the door. I was afraid that he would come back, but he didn't. Soon after, I went back to bed. I'm really glad that I woke up when I did that night and locked my door, or who knows what could have happened. One time, I was home by myself and watching TV. I was very relaxed, sitting on the couch in the living room and just enjoying the movie. The volume was kind of loud on the TV, and I was having some popcorn. To that point, I had been home for several hours, and it was a good night. As the movie went on, I remember that there was a really quiet part. Just during that, I thought I heard the sound of something coming from the other room. It got my attention, and I was slightly concerned for a moment, until I realized it was probably just my cat. He was always moving around the house, so I didn't pay it much thought. Several minutes later, though, at another quiet spot in the movie, I heard the sound from the other room again. It just didn't really sound like my cat, but what else could it be? I looked around, and then I saw that my cat was sleeping on the living room floor in the same room as me. That made me realize that the sound I heard in the other room was not the cat. I got a bad feeling, wondering what it could be. I paused the movie and listened closely. When I did, though, I stopped hearing anything for about a minute or two. Then I heard something again. It sounded like somebody was quietly walking through the kitchen, farther away. I couldn't see that area of the house from where I was. I stayed where I was on the couch, wondering if I should call the police or what. For several minutes, though, I didn't hear anything more. So at that point, I was wondering if I had gone crazy or if a person was actually in my house. I hadn't heard anything in a while, so I decided to just go to my kitchen and look. When I walked over there, things were still quiet. Then, as I reached the end of the living room, I heard somebody walking again. Whoever was in my house quickly made their way to the basement door and then opened it. As I looked into the room, I just barely saw the door closing and then heard someone going down the stairs. This confirmed me that an intruder was in my house and they were now going in my basement. I sprinted out of the room. Then I ran to the other staircase and went up to where my bedroom was. I locked myself in the room and then called the police from my cell phone. They said that they would send someone over right away and that it would be about 10 minutes. I felt better, but I would not be able to feel completely safe until the police were there and the person was out of my house. As I was in my bedroom waiting, after maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I heard the sound of someone walking on the main level of the house. I didn't know if this was the person leaving or what, but the fact that I was hearing them at all worried me. I hoped that they would have just stayed in the basement and the cops could find them there. Then I heard the footsteps reach the bottom of the staircase. Whoever was there then began walking up. Now I was really worried. They slowly walked up the stairs, and then it was like they made a beeline for my bedroom door. They went right up to it and then tried opening the door, which thankfully had a lock on it. When this happened, I desperately wanted the police to get there now, but they weren't there yet. The person walked away from the door and then back downstairs. I felt slightly better, but they still didn't leave. I heard them just walking around all over the main floor for several minutes, until at last the police arrived. The cops entered the house, and within seconds I heard multiple voices. After a while, when it was safe, I went downstairs. I saw that there were several officers there. They had found a man inside my house who I did not know. I was told that he was likely trying to rob my place. Luckily, he hadn't done any damage or anything. How he got inside of the house, I do not know. I'm really grateful that I came out of that situation all right. The scariest part to me is that the guy went up to my bedroom when I was in it. Back when I was in high school, I remember that one time we were going to have a planned lockdown drill. I remember that we would have these about once or twice a year. Sometimes they would even tell us like the day before that we were having a drill. I think that was so nobody would be alarmed by it and worry that it was real. So on this one day, I knew that we were having a lockdown drill during the 5th period, which was the last one of the day. The drill would usually consist of an announcement, and then the teachers turning off the lights to their classroom and locking the doors. Sometimes they would make the students huddle in the back of the classroom. Other times we would just sit in our desks. My last period of the day was usually pretty boring, but I did have one of my best friends in that class, Ryan, with me. This particular time, I remember that after 4th period, Ryan said that we should skip 5th period. At this moment, we had both completely forgot about the lockdown drill. I just remember that I knew we weren't doing much in the class, and so did Ryan. It was basically like a work day, where we would just work on homework assignments and stuff. So being immature high school kids, we decided to skip class and head home early. We went to our lockers to get our stuff, and took our time as the bells sounded indicating that class was now in session. We were in no rush, because the school was not super strict, and we figured we could just walk right out. After we left our lockers and started down a hallway, I remember that we heard the lockdown drill announcement. That's when we both remembered it. We figured that for the drill we had better not be out in the hallway, because a hall monitor might see us and make us go to class. Plus, we were sort of far off from the nearest exit doors to the school, so we decided to go find a bathroom until the lockdown drill was over. However, on the way there we soon heard footsteps behind us. We turned a corner and didn't look back, assuming it to be a hall monitor, so we walked faster and then turned another corner. When we did this, it sounded like the footsteps behind us were going faster as well. We quickly made our way to a bathroom and then went inside. Ryan went in one of the stalls and I went in another. We didn't close the doors to the stalls, but they stayed mostly closed on their own. Then we stood on the toilets so our feet couldn't be seen on the ground. A few moments later, we heard footsteps quickly approaching outside in the hallway. Whoever it was actually entered the bathroom, which caused me to be very nervous, and I'm sure Ryan was as well. We just stood there as quiet as can be. The person then entered the bathroom very briefly and then walked out pretty fast. It was like they just looked in really quick to see if anyone else was inside of it and then continued on. Now, Ryan and I both left our hiding spots a little bit quick. Probably like 10 seconds later, we had left the stalls and started to walk out. When we left the bathroom, we noticed that the person was still in the hallway. It was a man, and he had made it almost to the other end of the hall, and he was walking facing away from us. But we realized that this likely was not a hall monitor. He was wearing just a black jacket and jeans, which is not something that a school employee would wear. After we got out into the hallway, we noticed the man stop and then start to turn around. Ryan and I both quickly went in the other direction of the hall and then turned the corner. We started walking down the next hallway very quickly, just trying to get away from the guy. As we continued though, we soon saw someone else up ahead. This was a teacher that we both recognized. It was Mr. Herbert, and he saw us and asked us why we weren't in class, saying that a lockdown drill was going on. We told him that we were sorry and would go to class. As Mr. Herbert walked with us, escorting us to our classroom, we told him about the other man in the hallway. He didn't seem to have any idea who we were talking about and said that he would find out. Soon we got to our classroom and were led inside. and several minutes after that, there was another announcement stating that the school was now having a real lockdown. Several times they said that this was not a drill anymore. This lockdown lasted for about an hour until it finally ended and the school got out at about the same time. We learned that the man we had seen in the hallways was not supposed to be in the school, and he was arrested for trespassing after hiding in the school. Nobody knew what his intentions were. I think it's really crazy how he just happened to be there during a lockdown drill. Did he somehow know we were having a drill and did it on purpose so nobody would suspect him or notice him? I don't really think so, but it makes for a crazy coincidence. I'm also really glad that he didn't look farther into the bathroom where Ryan and I were hiding. We both learned a valuable lesson that day not to skip class, and I don't believe either of us ever skipped again after that. I remember my first ever school lockdown that I was a part of. It happened my freshman year of high school, and I was about 14 years old. I was sitting in geography class, and the teacher told us that there was a lockdown and it was not a drill. I remember that he locked the door to the classroom and then turned out the lights, and we were told not to get up from our desks. Now, nobody knew what the lockdown was for, but very quickly kids started to speculate. Nobody seemed to think that it was that serious, and most kids were just joking around. They were saying things like the school probably got locked down because a man was seen jaywalking nearby. Most people thought that the city our school was in was pretty boring and nothing crazy would happen. I personally was very curious, but I was also not too concerned and figured that it was nothing really that bad. As more time went by, us kids were talking a lot, and the teacher told us to be quiet a few times. The lockdown ended up lasting quite a long time. The more time went by, the quieter the classroom became, and the more worried I became. After over an hour, it was finally lifted. I remember feeling very relieved. We had just one class left for the day, and I remember noticing several police officers standing around in the hallways. The final class period went by pretty normal, and then we were let out of school for the day. I continued to see several police officers throughout the school, and out front were a bunch of police cars next to the buses, and more officers standing outside. I still didn't know what the lockdown had been for though, but the police presence made things feel safer, but it also made it seem like something serious was going on and they were trying to protect the students. Now, I personally did not ride the bus home because I lived in a neighborhood behind the school. It was like a 10-minute walk past the school grounds and through another neighborhood to get to mine. So after school, I went around behind it and then went past the tennis courts and football field. Then there was another field before some grass and trees and residential houses. When I made it off school property, I walked down the sidewalk past these rather large yards to the houses there. One of the yards had quite a bit of trees in it and was basically a woods. I remember that as I was walking home and passed by this, I saw a man who was sort of hiding behind a tree. I noticed him and he noticed me as well. He looked very suspicious, and I instantly wondered if he had something to do with the lockdown. I tried to just ignore him though, and I kept walking. Luckily, he did not try to follow me or anything. I was able to make it back several minutes later and then arrived home from a crazy day of school. At this point, I was home alone because both of my parents were still at work, and it was like this on most days. They'd usually get back a few hours later. So I was hanging out around the house, and like an hour after I had gotten back, I was in the kitchen, which is at the back of the house. I remember looking out the back window to the yard. Just when I did, I saw a man come into view walking into the backyard. The yard was completely fenced in and was not very large, but we had a few trees and a shed back there. The man walked around the yard and then went behind the shed between the wooden fence. I recognized the guy to be the same one who I had seen on the way home from school. I was very creeped out by this, and I felt like the right thing to do was to call the police. So I went over and dialed 911 and reported the guy. Thankfully, he hadn't seen me looking at him through the back window. I kept an eye out back as I waited for the cops to show up. The guy stayed hidden back there between the shed and the back wooden fence the entire time. After police went out to him, he briefly tried to run away before he was caught. The police stayed at my house for a while, and my parents soon got home. I ended up finding out that that man was wanted. He had been seen inside of our school and had entered without permission. That's when the school went into a lockdown. The man fled the school and was able to get away from police. After it was confirmed that he was not on school grounds, classes resumed, but with heavy police presence. They were also searching for him in the nearby area, and that's when I had seen him behind the tree, and then in my own backyard. That was a really crazy experience, and I'm glad that everything turned out okay. I'm a school teacher, and this is the story of something that happened a few years ago. Looking back, I feel bad about what happened, and I wish I had done a better job handling the situation, but I've learned from my mistakes. So, I was teaching second period English class, and I had a class of about 20 students in it. My room is on the upper level of the school and about halfway down a hallway. This class in particular was mostly juniors and seniors and was a well-behaved class. So I was teaching the class and then was going to give them some time to work on an assignment. After I started to let them work, I realized that I needed to get more worksheets and had run out. So down the hallway from my classroom there was a printer in the teacher's lounge, and I told the class that I would print off some more. I would only be gone for a few minutes and then I left. I went down the hallway and then logged onto the computer in the lounge and found the assignment and started printing them. I was the only one in the lounge at this time. After being gone for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I heard this sound come over the school intercom. At first, I didn't know what it was, but then I realized that it was a lockdown announcement. As soon as I heard this, I remembered my students. I knew that I needed to get back to the classroom immediately, and I quickly left the teacher's lounge. I literally started running down the hallway to get back to my classroom. When I got there, I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I was very confused and didn't know why. Soon though, I figured that the students were maybe following lockdown protocol and had locked the door. I started knocking on the door and tried looking in the window, but could only see the front part of the classroom, which was empty. Still, nobody was answering. I didn't know why, and after knocking a few more times, I called out, announcing myself. Then, I saw some guy come into view who I did not recognize. This was no student, but a grown man. He looked at me and then moved out of sight. Just after that, I heard a voice at the end of the hallway. It was one of my students. He yelled my name and said that I should get away from the classroom. I went over to him at the end of the hallway and asked what on earth was going on. My student told me that while they were in the classroom, some random guy just entered out of nowhere. He demanded everybody get out of the room immediately, so they did. All the students basically ran away, and the school quickly went into a lockdown. All this took place while I was printing papers, and I was completely unaware. The students had gone to other classrooms to take cover during the lockdown, so I went with the student to another nearby teacher's classroom. Meanwhile, police entered the school as well, and were able to locate the man who was still inside of my classroom. He locked himself in, and tried barricading himself inside by blocking the door. Eventually though, the police were able to get him to come out. I don't really know what his intentions were. I felt terrible for leaving my students and then the man entering the room. Since that happened, I've never left students alone in a classroom. When I was in high school, something really strange happened one time. Early on in the school day, I remember that I was in class and I left to go to the bathroom. This was something that happened all the time. I left the classroom and started walking down the hallway. When I was nearing the bathroom, I remember that I came across this woman who I assumed to be a teacher. She looked sort of professional, and we kind of crossed paths in the hallway. I had never seen her before though, and knew most of the teachers in the school, so I thought that maybe she was a sub. When I was walking by her, she asked me where a certain teacher's room was. I can't remember the name that she said, but it was a name that I had never heard before, and like I said, I knew most, if not all, the teachers in the school. I told her that I didn't know, and then I kept walking. I made my way to the bathroom and went inside. After being in there for like a minute, I left and went back out into the hallway. Right when I started walking back though, I heard the announcement for a lockdown over the school speakers. I started walking faster to get back to my classroom. A short time later though, I ran into the woman again. She was walking in the hallway and saw me once more. When she noticed me, she said that I was not supposed to be out in the hallway. She very confidently told me that I needed to come with her and to go to her classroom for the lockdown. I started to say that I was going back to my own classroom that I had been in, but she interrupted me and said no, I had to go with her. So at that point, I just said okay and started following her. She started to walk very quickly and we went down the hallway. At first, I couldn't believe how fast she was walking, and I was trying to keep up with her. I really didn't want to go to her classroom, but she wasn't giving me an option. So we went down 2 hallways, and she kept looking back at me like she was trying to make sure that I was still following her. Then we headed to the west wing of the school, which I was very familiar with. It was really just the gym and athletics area of the school, as well as some lockers and offices. There weren't really any classrooms over there. So at this point, I was very confused and also suspicious, because I knew this woman did not have a classroom over here. The longer I followed her, the more I got a bad feeling that got worse and worse, like I shouldn't be following her and I needed to get away. Then, one time when she wasn't looking back at me, I decided to just go back. I stopped and turned around and then just started sprinting back to my classroom. As soon as I did, the woman stopped and then started to chase after me. I ran as fast as I could, and at first the woman was right on my tail, but I was a lot faster than her and quickly able to pull away. I kept going and then made it all the way back to my classroom. I started banging on the door like crazy until I was let back in. I told my teacher about what happened, and she made a call to the offices. A while later, when the lockdown was lifted, I found out that the very same woman who had tried to get me to follow her was the cause of the lockdown. She had entered the school by breaking a window to an empty classroom. I'm not sure what exactly she wanted. She was not a substitute teacher at all, but was posing as one. Why she wanted me to go with her, I do not know, but I'm really glad that I followed my instincts and ran away, and that was the only lockdown in my high school career. It was crazy, and I'm glad that nothing like that happened again. I remember one really scary experience that I had back when I was in high school. I was a sophomore, and I used to ride the bus to and from school every day. One day, there was a pretty typical day of school. I went to all my classes, and nothing strange or unusual happened. When the last bell of the day rang at 2:45 p.m., school was out and we could go home. I remember that this time was always crazy and would be a mad dash to get to the bus on time. A lot of kids went to my school, and in between every class the hallways would be packed, so after school it was always really tough to walk through the halls, and the buses left at just after 2:50, so you only had 5 minutes to get to them. On this day, I left my classroom and made my way to my locker. I had to go there to get something before going to the bus. This proved to be a mistake, because after literally running through the hallways and getting outside, I saw that I had missed the bus. I was really disappointed, because I lived too far away from the school to walk home. I also didn't have any good friends with cars, so I would have to wait for my mom to get off of work and give me a ride. Fortunately for me, my mom got off of work at about 3:30 or 4 p.m. usually, so I would only have to wait at the school for about an hour or so. So after calling my mom, I went back inside of the school, not really knowing what I was supposed to do. I had never missed the bus before, and had never stayed after school unless I had a sports practice. When I went back inside of the school, I saw that there were only a few students still inside, mostly just upperclassmen who drove themselves. Within probably 10 more minutes, the hallways became completely empty with just me walking down them. Now, my school did not really have any places to hang out at all. There were no study areas or couches or chairs set up. It was just hallways and classrooms really. So I figured that I would just walk the halls while I waited for my mom to come to the school. I remember that I walked the halls for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I made it towards the back end of the school, and things were completely empty. Then I heard this sound come over the school speakers. It was followed by an announcement that there was a lockdown and that this was not a drill. At first, I was very confused. I didn't know that there would be lockdowns when school was not in session, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to do in this type of a situation. Obviously, I was not in class and didn't have a classroom to go to either. I looked around at the classrooms that I was passing by, and all their doors were closed and they seemed to be empty. I kept walking, thinking maybe I would just leave the school altogether. That's when I came around a corner, and way up down the hallway, I saw this guy wearing all black and a ski mask on his head. I knew that something was up there, and I quickly went back around the corner. I saw the bathrooms and quickly went inside them. Once I was there, I stopped and listened to see if the person would go near. I figured the bathrooms were really the only place I could hide for the lockdown. For a minute or two, things were pretty quiet, and I didn't hear anything. Then I started to hear footsteps not far out in the hallway. They didn't really get that close though, but seemed to be a ways away. Moments later, I heard a very loud banging sound, like someone was smashing the lockers or something. I didn't know what exactly it was, but it made me feel on edge. These sounds went on for a while. Then, after about a minute or so of quiet, I heard more loud banging followed by the sound of glass breaking. It was from a ways down the hallway, but I no longer felt safe hiding in the bathroom. When things quieted down a little bit again, I knew that I needed to get out of there. I carefully went to the entrance of the bathrooms and looked out into the hallway. I didn't see anything, indicating that the sounds I heard must not have been within my sight. Then I quickly left the bathroom and ran the opposite direction to where I had heard the noises. I ran all the way until I got to the front of the school. When I got towards the lobby, I saw a police officer. He seemed a little bit surprised to see me, but I quickly told him how I had seen a guy in a ski mask and stuff. Another police officer who had entered the school told me to go outside the front door and they would handle it. I went out and there were several police cars. I waited there while the police went inside, and my mom got there a little while later. I was able to go home with her, and there were a bunch of police cars still there and the police in the school at that point. I went home and heard about the rest on the news. The police had ended up finding a guy inside and catching him. The man had simply walked inside the school wearing a ski mask after hours. Obviously it was suspicious and he got reported. I guess he went around and caused a bunch of damage to the school, breaking windows to several classrooms and breaking other equipment as well. That must have been what I had heard. It was a very scary situation, and I'm glad that I was able to get out of it.
In 2011, I moved to a college in Colorado during the winter for my master's degree in psychology. The school had a really good program, and a master's was mandatory for my career. My financial aid covered housing, and I had a single dorm that sat right on the edge of campus. Most of my classmates were nice, and my professors were some of the best, especially at an Ivy League school. Mid-semester, I had my midterm coming up and had a lot of homework to do. Living in a one-bedroom dorm with basically no friends, I decided that I'd take a walk to the woods beside the dorms. It was nicknamed Jordan's Forest. I still don't know who Jordan was or why it was called that, but a lot of students would commonly go there to smoke and stuff. I was never into that and hoped for a moment to myself with nobody around. So anyway, there I am, heading down the trail, keeping to myself when I decide to sit down by the old fountain hidden deeper into the woods. Apparently the fountain used to belong to a fraternity at one point. However, I guess they haven't used it in a while, as the fountain was hanging by a thread and appeared to have been unkept for years. As I'm sitting by the fountain, just reflecting on life, I hear footsteps in the snow from behind me. I turn around, and standing there is a man with a jacket and hat on. He gives me a friendly gesture as a way to say hello, and me, being the shy person I was, gave him a quick smile. He then comes up to me and introduced himself as Doug. As I said, I wanted to be alone with myself at the moment, and having someone else nearby really killed the mood. However, I didn't want to come off as rude, so I tell him my name and went on my phone to act busy. Right away, something seemed off about him, and he didn't exactly look like a college student. If I had to guess, I'd say he had to be in his late 30s or maybe early 40s. He proceeds to sit down beside me while keeping a short distance before saying, "So, is this your first time on campus?" he said. "Yeah, I just started my master's," I said. He looks at me with a smirk and says, "Oh, I see. Well, you'll love it here. You seem so young and bright. You do fine." I thank him for the compliment and tend to my phone to try and talk to him the least I could, hoping he'd get the hint. After some minor small talk, I finally say it's getting colder and that I was gonna head back to my dorm. As I'm walking away, I could just feel his eyes glued to the back of me, and the minute I turned around, I saw him staring at me. It wasn't until then where I started walking a little faster, hoping he wasn't following me. When I created a safe enough distance, I checked behind me once more and didn't see him. I breathed a sigh of relief and entered my dorm to continue studying for my midterm. However, as I was studying, I couldn't stop thinking about that man. I'm not one to be judgmental or anything, but he didn't strike me as a student at all. I'm not saying older people don't go back to school, they do, but there was indeed something off about him. I studied for another 2 hours or so when I decide to call it there and settle in for the night. I freshen up in the shower when my friend from my home state calls me via FaceTime. This is someone who I haven't spoken to in weeks, so I step out of the shower with my robe on and gladly answer it. She was mentioning about how she got a new job and how she just moved in with her boyfriend. Basically a bunch of life stuff. We're talking on the phone for a good hour or so when I decide to lean my phone against some books so the camera is on me. She continues her story and such when she suddenly stops mid-sentence and looks at me strangely. When I ask her what was wrong, she says that there's someone looking into my room from the window. My blood ran cold and I turn around and see what I can only describe as Doug peeking through my window. The second he spots me, he ducks down out of view. I begin telling my friend that I had met this man earlier and didn't know who he was. She recommended I call campus security, and I did just that. I even had my friend still on the phone with me as a way to make me feel like I was with someone. As I'm on the phone with security, I hear my doorknob start to move and someone trying to open it. Thankfully it was locked, but I'll never forget the voice Doug made while trying to open my door. It was this low and gravelly voice, telling me that he could easily break this door down with one kick. I'll admit, I started to shed tears right then, just wanting security to get here. When they did, they had arrived with police who then placed him under arrest. Turns out Doug had actually been a student here once and has since been homeless for over 5 years. His girlfriend died while they were both in school and had chose to live near campus as a way to cope, as this was the last memory of her and him together. I will say I did feel some sympathy for him, but I couldn't allow him to continue what he did to me to others. Up until recently, he was released from prison for good behavior, and the university has since banned him from being on campus grounds. I graduated with honors a year later, and I haven't returned to campus since. I'm a 27-year-old male now, but the story takes place when I was around 14 or so. I lived in North Carolina, and I've lived there my whole life, even when this happened. I'm not a huge guy by any means, so at 14 I was thin as a toothpick with little to no muscle. This will be important in the story later. The following events took place around early December of 2011. It was late at night in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was home alone. My mom was working in urgent care that night, and my dad was out of state on a business trip for work. Seeing as my mom worked late, I had the house to myself, and with it being winter break, I spent most of my night playing video games. Everything from COD all the way to Minecraft. After playing for quite some time, I take a look at the time and see that it's well past 9 p.m. Me, being the skinny kid I was, decided to head downstairs and fix myself a snack. As I'm heating up my food, I looked to my left and noticed the door that led into the basement was open. Now, my family is very strict when it came to leaving doors open, and I always made sure to close them. Mind you, I rarely go into the basement, so I was surprised that my parents left it open. Having OCD myself, I preferred things organized, so I went over to close the door when my heart sank. I almost didn't notice it, but at the end of the stairs was a black figure sitting on the bottom step. By some stupid luck, he was facing the other way, so he didn't see me. I felt my heart legitimately sink into the pit of my stomach as I realized what was happening. While I didn't see their face, I did see the back of them. They appeared to be male and wore torn clothing with gray, messy hair. With not many options to choose from, I run upstairs and hide under my bed, not making a sound. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, and I sure as hell wasn't going into the kitchen to get the home phone. With nothing to do, I just stayed in my room, hiding under my bed when I hear footsteps coming up the basement stairs. At this point, I knew whoever this person was knew I was here. In my innocent 14-year-old head, I prayed he would just leave if he knew there was someone else here. However, that simply wasn't the case. Instead of accepting that there was someone else here, he took it a step further and proceeded to walk upstairs to my room. I hear him coming and I come out from under my bed with my mind racing on what to do. Now, this is where my lack of strength comes into play. I was trapped in my room, I didn't have a weapon, and I wasn't sure what this person was capable of doing. With no other option, I go to my window and attempt to open it as a way to escape. However, the cold weather from outside made it more difficult for me to open the window as the frame was basically frozen. All the while, I'm trying to get it open and I hear the footsteps walk up the stairs and stop at my door. He then proceeds to knock, followed by him mumbling something I couldn't understand. What freaked me out the most about this was the way he knocked. It was slow and steady, almost as if he were trying to intimidate me somehow. He tried twisting the doorknob, but it didn't budge, as I had thankfully remembered to lock it. In that moment, I had a hard time getting the window open when I suddenly hear a loud bang and see my door is now open. At that point, I pushed the window with all my strength and finally managed to get it open. I took that chance to climb out, and as I did, I caught a glimpse of the man's face before falling to the snow below. Fortunately, I was able to get away to the neighbors with only a sprained ankle, where police were then called. While the neighbors were nice, they let me call the police myself as they didn't want to get involved. A bit strange, I thought, but I could understand why. The police were very patient with me, but even after searching the house, they were unable to find him. What police had concluded was that he had entered the house through our breezeway door and was likely hiding from the cold. My mom came soon after, and we spent the next 3 days at my uncle's house. I'm much older now, and I have moved past it. My parents still live in that same house, but have installed various security systems and even have a dog. I still think about this incident from time to time, but I'm doing alright. Back before my girlfriend Eliza and I started dating, we hung out all the time as good friends. We both obviously didn't have the same feelings for each other back then, but we did enjoy each other's company. This happened around the time where we both started to feel that there was something more to our relationship than friends. It was the winter of 2018, and we both had planned a skiing trip up to Vermont. Vermont had really good slopes, and with us having some experience with skiing, we were up for a challenge. We rented out a hotel room close to the ski resort as it seemed the most convenient for us. We took the gondola ride up to the mountain and had a great time skiing. As much as people don't like the idea of skiing, it was actually really fun if you practiced. That being said, we spent most of the day skiing and having a blast. Apart from the ski resort was a hiking trail and lodge for people who either didn't want to go skiing or if people wanted a break. It was nearing the end of the day, and Eliza suggested we take the hour-long hike around the mountain. Now, this hike was sort of a do-it-at-your-own-risk type of hike, meaning there was no trail guide or anything like that. The only thing we had as a guide was some painted markings around the trees to know where we were going. Even though it was a beginner's hike, it was still really easy to get lost in these woods. Eliza and I started our hike, just enjoying ourselves and whatnot. We're about 20 minutes into the hike when she has the urge to pee. It wouldn't be for another 50 minutes or so before we reached an actual bathroom, so she said she'd go into the woods and that she'd be back. I watch as she walks off the path and into the woods before disappearing behind a large tree. She went pretty far off, but I thought she just needed extra privacy, especially us being on our first trip together. However, as the minutes passed, she never returned to the path and I didn't even see her. I then thought to myself, what could she possibly be doing that's taking her so long? I thought. At this point, she had been gone for a good 10 minutes, and that's when I started to get worried. I step out of the trail and follow her footpath to try and find out where she went. Thank God I see her standing by a small clearing with her phone out. Then she motions for me to go to her. When I walk up to her, I see what she stopped for. In this small clearing was what I could only describe as huge bones. Maybe bear, maybe horse, I don't know. The majority of the bones were organized in circles, and even some formed into a teepee of sorts. There were also some smaller bones hanging from trees by some string. I asked Eliza what the hell this was. As expected, she didn't know, and we began to wonder if the resort knew about this. There was also what appeared to be a half-formed humanoid snowman type sculpture next to the bones, indicating that someone had recently been here. All of a sudden, we both began to get a strange feeling that we were being watched, and we got out of there ASAP. We were not going to stick around to find out who or what made this, as it didn't strike me as anything good. We told the resort, but we never heard anything back from them after our trip. In the off chance that the bones were fake, it could have very well been someone easily pranking us. However, I'm not sure if I believe that. We're now a couple and plan on getting married soon, but we'll always have this story to share. It was New Year's Eve 2016. My friend Kevin had invited me over to his place to come watch fireworks with his girlfriend. Buying fireworks wouldn't be necessary, as his next-door neighbors had put on quite a show every year. They basically did one for the whole neighborhood, so that people didn't have to leave their homes or go out and buy fireworks. They would obviously be setting off fireworks right at 12, and Kevin had allowed me to arrive much earlier, giving us time to chill. New Year's Eve was on a Saturday, and neither of us had to work the next day, so that meant I could stay longer. For reference, we were both in our late 20s, so naturally we were more able to stay out late. Kevin had ordered us some pizza for dinner, and even grabbed a few cold ones for the special New Year. I hadn't seen Kevin nor his girlfriend in a while, primarily due to work, so we all wanted to make this night special for the three of us. We all sat down in the living room waiting for the ball drop, which was also when the neighbors would start their fireworks. We still had a good 2 hours before the new year, and that's when Kevin said he was gonna go buy some more beers at the gas station since we didn't have enough. His girlfriend and I stayed at the house while he was out. At one point, I'm in the living room and his girlfriend is out back talking on the phone with someone. I found myself watching TV when I hear what sounded like a door shut from upstairs. This was weird, as Kevin had mentioned it would only be the three of us at his house tonight. I look at his girlfriend, but she didn't appear to hear it as she was still on the phone. The minute she got off the phone, I go up to her and ask if she heard a door close from upstairs. She replied with a no, and that it was likely the wind, as she had apparently left a window open up there earlier. That seemed to have explained it, and I went back to the living room before Kevin had come back with the remaining beers. By this point, we only had about an hour left, and we used that time to play Uno, a game both of them played every New Year's Eve as a sort of tradition. Kevin and his girlfriend were on their fourth beer, so they naturally got drunk, making everything funnier for them. Anyway, we finish the game and go outside getting ready to watch the fireworks. Keep in mind that we were so close to the neighbors that we could practically see them get ready, so we basically had front row seats. Kevin had set up his tripod and camera to film the fireworks, as he did every year. We turned on the TV outside and counted down to the new year, wishing each other great success, new memories, etc. Several fireworks began to shoot up into the sky, lighting up the night with vibrant colors with the loud sound vibrating in us. It was honestly a great experience so far, and I wanted to walk out to the backyard to get a clear shot with my phone. The whole show lasted a good 10 minutes or so, and once it was over, I turned around to face the house, and that's when I saw someone in the upstairs window. Both Kevin and his girlfriend were still on the porch, and I told Kevin to call the police and that someone was in the house. He was still a little tipsy from the alcohol, but when he snapped out of it, he ran upstairs with a kitchen knife. All the while, I was expecting to hear some sort of commotion going on, but it never did. All I heard was a few doors opening and closing and Kevin coming downstairs a few minutes later. He told us that he didn't find anyone up there and wanted to make sure if what I saw was actually a person. I told him I was sure, even by pointing out which room I saw them in, who was probably now gone. I mean, what else would it have been, I thought. Me, Kevin, and his girlfriend searched the entire house looking for the supposed intruder, but ultimately found nothing. Seeing as I had a few drinks myself while also being tired, I accepted the fact that it was all in my head at the end of the night when I went home. They didn't call the cops because, well, there really was no point. Days went by and I went on with life as usual, and I began to sort of forget about the whole thing. That was until a week later, where I received a phone call at 1 a.m. from Kevin. I was nearly half asleep at that point, but he said that he was sorry for not believing me about the person I saw on New Year's. Turns out, Kevin had gotten home from work early and caught a homeless man drinking a milk carton from his fridge. The person I saw in the window that night was him. There's really no point in explaining what directly happened after that, but let's just say Kevin took it into his own hands. The man simply admitted to sneaking into his house a day after Christmas through his garage door. His reason being because of the cold outside and wanted to find warmth. For context, we live in Wisconsin, meaning we have some of the coldest winters in the US. He was arrested and taken in, which according to Kevin didn't seem like the worst idea, as at least he'd have food and a bed. The most disturbing part, however, was that he was caught with 2 pairs of Kevin's girlfriend's underwear in his pocket. I'm guessing this was the reason as to what made Kevin did what he had to, I don't know. Kevin and I are still friends till this day, but had broken up with his girlfriend for reasons I won't go into. However, every year we still look back on this incident and will continue to do so for what may be the rest of our lives.
This happened in September of 2022, and at the time I lived in Wisconsin. I was also a sophomore in high school. I met a 17-year-old named Austin at my summer job. He used to attend the same high school as me, but had been expelled for plagiarism. That's what he told me, and I didn't question it. You can be thrown out of a university for plagiarizing someone else's work, but high school would put you into detention at worst, leading me to believe that he was kicked out for a different reason. We became friendly, and he would pick me up and drop me off during the summer whenever we had work, because I didn't have a driver's license at the time. I also want to point out that it was pretty obvious that he had a crush on me, but I didn't feel the same way about him. To clarify, he insisted on giving me a ride, and I even offered to give him money to cover gas. I was not leading him on in any way. Fast forward to the 2nd or 3rd week of school. Austin and I were driving home from a party that a mutual friend from school was throwing. Again, I needed a ride. When Austin pulled up to my house to drop me off, he finally popped the question. "Hey, listen, I think you and I should go out sometime." I'm sorry, Austin. I just don't have those kind of feelings for you. I would prefer if we stayed friends." I could tell that my response really upset him. Looking back, I can see how he may have gotten the wrong idea. Please try not to judge me too harshly. The only excuse I have was that I was only a teenager back then. We waved goodbye to each other, and I went inside my house, took off my shoes, changed into my pajamas, brushed my teeth, and was ready to call it a night. Before I fell asleep, I got a text from a friend. What I read on screen is something I'll never forget. It was a paragraph-long message about how Austin had been secretly taking photos of me while I was sleeping in my bed, through my window. While that revelation was still sinking in, several photos of me sleeping came through. Apparently, Austin had been bragging about it at the party and even showed off his collection, which found their way back to me. When you're hit with news like that, you feel cold. I knew that Austin had a thing for me, but I didn't think it would ever be something this twisted. On top of that, I was literally in the exact spot of where the photos were taken. The first thing I did was check my window and close my blinds. I then immediately sent him a text in all caps. "Never contact me again." He seemed to know right away why I said that to him, and quickly began to apologize and started playing the victim card. I felt like screaming after reading his pathetic texts, and then told him, "Lose my number and never speak to me again." Then I blocked him. I wasn't feeling tired anymore, and I got up to take some melatonin so I could fall asleep. I don't know how long I was out for, but I woke up to the sound of my window shattering. I sat up in bed to see a dark figure stepping through. I quickly got out of bed and ran toward the door. The figure moved to catch me, but slipped on a piece of broken glass and fell to the floor. When I looked back, I could see that the intruder was in fact Austin, and that he also had a knife in his hand. I started to scream hysterically. My dad quickly came out into the hallway, asking me what the hell was going on. All I could do was point to my bedroom door. When he rushed inside, Austin was gone. After I told my father who it was, he immediately called the police, and they arrived 10 minutes later, along with the paramedics. I didn't know it at first, but when I rushed out of my bedroom, my feet were cut on the broken glass. I had lost a lot of blood, and was now feeling dizzy. After I told the police my side of the story, the paramedics ended up taking me to the hospital, where I stayed overnight. It took the cops a while to track down Austin, but they eventually arrested him. During his sentencing, he addressed the court and admitted that he didn't know why he did it, and also expressed that he was in love with me. Austin was convicted of multiple felony charges. The prosecutor was able to uncover more evidence that proved he intended to kill me, so the final verdict was breaking and entering and attempted first-degree murder. A year later, he successfully appealed the murder charge. I don't know all the details, but his mental health and lack of criminal record before that night played a major factor. Austin is currently serving a 16-year prison sentence. Although justice has been served, I still get very skittish whenever I meet new people, especially men. I know I sound crazy, but I still have a lot of PTSD over what happened that night. I hope Austin goes to hell for what he did.
My wife passed away over 15 years ago, caused by a drunk driver. After mourning for several long years, I decided that I'd try online dating to get my dating life back up and running. This was in the early 2000s, so the world of online dating was just being introduced. I signed up for Match.com, filled out the usual forms, and chose some photos of myself I thought looked presentable. Within a day, I had matched with a woman with similar interests. She had claimed to be just a little younger than I was, lived in the same town, and while she wasn't a 10 out of 10, she wasn't ugly. Her name was Alexa, and we hit it off well. We started off as online friends, but as time went on, I started to see her something more than a friend. I decided I wanted to meet her, so I grew some balls and asked her out. "Alexa, would you be interested in grabbing a drink at, say, the local bar?" Alexa replied saying that she'd be happy to. She knew of my family's situation about the passing of my wife, so she was very patient and understanding with me. The local bar is this country-styled pub where everyone in town hangs out. Before social media, the bar is how you knew where everyone was at. It was sort of the spot that only locals knew about. Our town doesn't get many tourists, so everyone pretty much knew each other. The bar is also a major gossip spot. We're a small town, so there are no secrets. Even the state police stop there, as well as truckers and stuff like that. I made a few trucker friends here and there and pretty much got along with everyone. Alexa and I agreed to meet the next day, so I had to make sure I was ready for it. I haven't been on a first date in years, so I was understandably nervous as hell. I got cleaned up, made sure I had enough money, car was clean, and the usual pre-date preparations. The bar is only about 5 minutes from my house, so I get there a few minutes early to get situated. When I walk in and look around, Alexa was nowhere to be seen. I assume she must have been running late, so I took that chance to find a table and text her saying that I was here. Everyone in the bar began to stare and make comments on how I was dressed. The server, Gabriella, was a 19-year-old college student who is also the owner's daughter. Remember when I said the bar is a gossip spot? If you want to know what's going on, you ask Gabby. When times were slow at the bar, Gabby would go online and dig up some research about criminals and anything weird that goes on. They even have a bulletin board with pictures of all criminals and local pedophiles. Like I said, small town, no secrets. Gabby comes over to me commenting about the way I was dressed and asked if I was on a hot date. When I told her that I was, she had asked if she could see a picture of my lady friend, and when I showed her, she got this strange look on her face. She muttered a nice comment and left to go get my drink. This was unusual for Gabby because she chats everyone's ears off. So much that she sometimes forgets to give people their orders. I got a message from Alexa saying she was 10 minutes away and that she was caught in traffic. It was then when I noticed Gabby talking to other patrons, only for all of them to constantly glance over to me with this look I can't even explain. As I looked around the bar, I noticed that everyone would look away when I made eye contact with them. I got another text from Alexa saying that she was 5 minutes away. Gabby comes back with my drink and asks if she could see the picture of Alexa again. I gladly showed her. After seeing it again, she asks me, "You know who that is, don't you?" It's Alexa," I replied. That's a guy dressed up as a woman. This guy likes to stalk people and lure them into taking people's money. He got out of jail 6 months ago for good behavior." I blurted out a "what the hell" as she said this. As it turns out, this guy enjoyed seeking pleasure of preying upon lonely men, just like me. He was the black sheep from a very influential family that had relatives in law enforcement, local papers, county councils, the judicial system, and even school board positions. Alexa was charged with both stalking men and women on dating sites and would sometimes even go into their homes only to steal all of their valuables. Apparently, he even broke into the victims' homes before targeting them. From what Gabby had told me, he was in jail for 2 years and was released but given a deal from the county attorney's office with the following conditions. 1. Not to use dating sites. 2. Mandated management counseling to control his impulse. 3. To wear a monitoring device so he couldn't go back to his victims' homes. 4. Never to contact any of the victims. 5. He would be on probation for 4 years. Gabby had told me that she had called the police as this guy wasn't supposed to be on any dating sites. The police also requested for me to act calm and natural until they got there. I thought to myself, act calm? How the hell am I supposed to remain calm when this guy is dressed up like, and sounds like, a woman was hitting on me? I was beyond furious. I couldn't even find the right words to use to describe what I was feeling. However, I wanted to keep the peace, so I tried to pull myself together not to erupt into a raging madman. Right then, I received another text from her saying she was parking, and it was at that point where I wanted to go outside and kill the bastard. Gabby had told me that one of the truckers would protect me if things went south. A few seconds later, the door to the bar opened and the woman from Match.com appeared. A dead silence came over the bar. I waved half-heartedly while trying to keep my composure so I wouldn't find myself breaking his jaw. Gabby very formal and politely walks up to Alexa asking if she needed a table. Alexa replies, "Oh, no, there's my date, over there." Just as that was said, 2 county sheriff cars pull in and the Alexa imposter flees, running out the door. He didn't get very far though. One of the officers got out and body slammed him to the ground. All the while, Alexa tried convincing the police that he was in fact a woman by faking the female voice I was all too familiar with. He was arrested and put in jail much longer than before. From that day forward, I swore to myself that I would never go on another online dating site again. I'm a 20-year-old college student, and this recently happened to me a few months ago. My dating life hasn't always been the best, but I've been with a few girls here and there. This was primarily because I didn't have the time to date, as my life was basically revolving around school. I'm currently majoring in engineering, so you could imagine how much schoolwork I was swamped with. Anyway, I had been at my friend's dorm one night who had just introduced me to his new girlfriend. They had apparently met over a dating site called Plenty of Fish, an app I've never heard of. She was nice, but as the night progressed, I started to become jealous of my friend's relationship. My desire to meet someone grew stronger than ever, and so I decided to try out online dating myself. I've never done online dating before, so all of it was new to me. My friend had recommended Plenty of Fish, as it was apparently the most reliable site out there. Just gotta say, paying $30 for a membership on a dating site is outrageous. I paid the fee and began creating my profile with info and pictures of me. The first week on the app, I matched with absolutely no one. The very few women I did match with either didn't bother messaging me back or were bots. This was one of the big reasons as to why I was not a fan of online dating. Reliable my ass. After a few days of getting basically zero attention, I sort of stayed off the app for a good while and continued with my normal life. About 2 weeks later, I'm at the movies with my friends when I get a notification from Plenty of Fish. I open the message to see that I had matched with this really cute girl who was just a bit younger than I was. She attended the same university as me and didn't live too far. She had messaged me wanting to know more about me and referred to me as a hunk. Hunk is slang for basically saying someone is attractive or good-looking. Being the ecstatic guy I was, I gladly reply and tell her more about myself. My friends make a few comments about her, telling me how I was lucky and how I'd get laid. The usual comments close friends would sort of make. The person I had matched with was named Samantha, and we really seemed to connect. She was a gamer like myself, and we both shared similar interests, which is what made us connect even more. We chatted through the app for a good few days and eventually led to SMS. Nothing was out of the ordinary, just casual talk and the iMessage games we played. However, little did I know that would all change in just one night when Samantha started being sexual with me. Of course, being the hormone-filled young adult I was, I decided to play along. We played it safe by sending photos of us removing our clothing until I eventually sent her a nude. Nothing really happened the rest of the night, but I noticed that she wasn't texting me the next day at all. This was unusual for her, as she's normally very responsive and fast. At one point, I was sitting at my desk studying for my midterm when I received a call from her. She had never called me before, so I was kinda surprised, but picked up and greeted her. There was a long pause before I hear someone on the other end. However, on the other end was not Samantha at all. The voice on the other end was a man's voice saying, "What are pictures of you doing on my 15-year-old daughter's phone?" I felt my blood run cold and hung up the call immediately and deleted everything dating related from my phone. I was in a panic as I knew hanging up was the wrong move. Did this girl lie about her age? Was I a victim of some sort of trick? Then, all of a sudden, a text from her contact pops up that read, "You better call me back or you'll be in a prison cell within an hour." All I can remember was explaining to the supposed father that I didn't know she was underage and that her profile said she was 19. All I got in response, though, was how I was a monster, a pedophile, and how he was gonna lock me up. For a second, I really thought about my life being over. All my hard work and education being ruined because of this. He then presented me with a proposal. If I would send this man $1,000 for the deactivation of his daughter's phone, he won't call the cops. At the time, my bank account had about $700 in savings. It was my savings for a car, but I was prepared to give it to him if that meant I didn't have to be put behind bars. I had asked if I could call my family to help pay the remaining $300, and he said yes. After a whole ordeal with my parents, they sent me the rest of the money, but that my dad wanted to talk to this man. I'd say my dad sent over 100 messages to this man, threatening him in the worst way possible. All we got in response was that he hoped I would enjoy prison. My parents said I didn't have to worry about it as this was all likely a scam, an attempt to extort me because I was so young and naive. For the next couple weeks, I was paranoid that a police officer would come to my door with a pair of handcuffs with my name on them. However, no one ever came. The number I had saved for this guy ended up being disconnected after a week. Till this day, I still wonder if it really was just a ploy. Even if it was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. And if it wasn't, I guess it technically means that I'm guilty, even though I really never knew her real age. My parents are convinced that it was indeed a scam. I hope that you'll use my story as a sort of lesson to be learned about scams like this and the dangers of online dating. Be careful out there, folks. For the past year, I've been on a lot of online dating apps nonstop. I had recently broke up with my boyfriend due to his toxic behavior and knew I had to find someone else who would benefit me in life. Being a girl who had already graduated college, it was hard to find new people, so I turned to online dating. Sites like Tinder, OkCupid, Bumble, etc. One day, I had matched with a guy named Zach on Tinder who I enjoyed talking to really well. Based on his profile picture, he seemed cute and confident about his career and hobbies. We had messaged back and forth, and at one point he wanted to meet me. I've never been involved with the dating life since college, so I was very nervous. I told him that he could come over to my house as my parents were out of town and we could have the place to ourselves. He agreed with that idea and made plans for him to come over during the weekend. When the day finally came to meet Zach, I cleaned the house, dressed nice, and even made some fresh brownies for us. Fast forward to 3 p.m., I hear a knock at the door and go over to open it. Standing at the front of the door was a man I had never seen before greeting me. However, it was not at all Zach, and he didn't even look like him. He wore torn and dirty clothing and looked like he hadn't been to the gym in years. When I questioned him about why he lied about the photos, he said that was actually pictures of his nephew. At this point, I'm immediately creeped out, but I didn't want to be rude and kick him out. We both agreed to watch a movie on the couch, and I made sure to stay far away from him as possible. During the movie, I felt his eyes stare at me in this weird way I didn't understand. It was as if he were staring through my soul. It came to a point where I made up a lie saying that my parents were coming home and that he had to leave. Thankfully, he respected this and got up to leave. Before he did, he took out a pocket knife and said something that made my skin crawl. "I could have killed you today, Ashley." He jokingly chuckled as he made his way out of my house and into his old pickup truck. I never heard from Zach again, but this is one of the creepiest moments I've ever experienced. I'm now more aware of online dating, and I'll just stick to meeting people in real life.
Last year, I went on a road trip with my girlfriend. We were taking a vacation, but we chose to drive instead of flying. We did that because we could stop more places and explore, and also because it was cheaper. This was the second road trip that we had taken together, and the first one was a lot of fun, so we were looking forward to it. When the road trip started, the first day of driving went by really well. We stopped at a few cool places and explored around some towns. Then we made it to our hotel for the night. The next day, we got up bright and early in the morning and hit the road. We were hoping to make it all the way to our destination by that night. It was a long day of driving, but overall it was fun. However, we ended up driving sort of late into the night. By about 10 p.m., we still had another hour and a half left. I was driving and I decided to stop at the next gas station because we were running a little low. Plus, I wanted to get a coffee and some snacks, and my girlfriend wanted coffee as well. So at the next exit, I pulled off of the highway that we were on. There was a pretty large truck stop, it appeared, with a gas station and store attached. When I arrived there, I first put more fuel into the car, and then I went and parked next to the store. There were a decent number of other cars and trucks around, and this was clearly a pretty popular place for people to stop. So my girlfriend and I got out of the car and started walking in. I do remember that as we were walking in, a few other people were as well, including a family with a few children a little bit ahead of us. We got inside of the store and first used the restrooms. Then my girlfriend said that she would get the coffee if I wanted to look for some snacks. The store was very large for a truck stop. It had quite a few aisles, and there was a coffee shop type of place attached to it, which is where my girlfriend went. So I started to walk through the snack aisles and think about what I wanted to get. It was a few minutes into that I noticed a man and a child start to walk into the aisle that I was in. The man was a bit larger of a guy who appeared to be in his 40s or so, and the child looked to be about 5 or 6. The man was holding onto the kid's hand, and it seemed as though after they saw me in the aisle, they turned around and walked out. But when I looked at the kid, I remembered seeing him walking into the store with the family ahead of us. I had seen the kid's parents, and this guy was not one of them. I got a bad feeling, like maybe this guy was trying to kidnap the kid or something. I thought about it for a moment, and I was 90% sure that this kid didn't belong to him, and the way that the man was holding on to the child's hand seemed almost like he was dragging him along. I decided to go and see where the guy was going, so I walked over to the end of the aisle. I didn't immediately see the man, so I scanned around the store. Then I noticed him walking along the backside of the store near the cold drinks. He was still with the child. After making it to the corner of the store, he walked along the next side of it, going towards the exit doors. When I saw this, I walked forward and I reached the doors before the man would. Soon, the man and the child reached me. I remember that the man said, "Excuse me," and started to walk around me, but I said, "Wait a minute." The man stopped and looked at me. His face appeared nervous. I flat out asked him if that was his kid, and I said that I saw the child enter with other parents. The man said yes, it was his son. I looked to the boy, who seemed shy and a little bit confused. I asked if that was his dad, and he shook his head saying no. The man then started to open the door anyways and tried to leave with the kid. By now, we had been standing there for almost a minute. I spoke louder, saying that I just wanted the other people to come over and confirm if it was their kid or not. Before I got done speaking though, the man suddenly let go of the child and just ran out the door. I watched him walk at an extremely fast pace to this old-looking van and get inside of it. I tried looking for the license plate number, but I couldn't see good enough. Then I walked with the child around the store until we finally found his parents. When I found them, I told them what happened. They were obviously upset, but also grateful. The parents had 3 other kids, and one of the older children apparently was supposed to be watching the younger one. I'm not sure where the man had come from, but I'm really glad that he didn't leave with the child. The police got called, and there was a big investigation. My girlfriend and I then went back onto the road. A couple of years ago, I took a road trip all by myself out to California. One of my good friends moved out there, and I had never been there before, so I wanted to visit and also see some cool places in California and experience it. I was going to drive there in about 2 days. On the first day, I drove from sun up to sundown and even past that. I stopped a few times for food and stuff, but for the most part, I drove the whole time. I had booked a hotel online, and I had the address of it on my phone. By the time that I was about 30 minutes out from the hotel, it was probably about 10:30 p.m. I knew that I was going to be taking an exit up ahead in like 20 miles or so. As some more time went by, I felt like the exit should be approaching. I looked at my phone to see how close it was, and just as I looked at it, I saw the phone turn off like it had died. I tried turning it back on, but I realized that it was in fact dead. I had a car charger, but it had been having some problems recently at the time. It was one of those old chargers that sometimes it randomly wouldn't work, or you would have to mess around with it a while before it worked. So I got the charger and tried plugging it into the phone and turning it on, but nothing happened. I kept driving and saw some exits coming up. I just guessed that these were the ones that I was supposed to take. I didn't know for sure, but I was hoping that I would be correct. Maybe if I drove down the exit, I would see the hotel or a sign for it or something. So I took the exit and went to the right. I passed by an old gas station, but that was about it. As I continued to drive down this road, things were much quieter there. The roads didn't have any other cars on them at all. I drove along the road for probably 2 or 3 miles. At that point, I realized that I didn't really know where I was going, and I had probably taken the wrong exit. I wanted to figure it out though, so I pulled over to the side of the road that I was on. Then I took the charger and tried to figure out what was wrong. I unplugged it, plugged it back in, and started moving it around, trying to get it to work. I sat there in my car for a few minutes trying everything I could to get the charger to charge my phone, but nothing seemed to do it. It seemed as though that charger had finally bit the dust for good. I realized that I would have to buy a new one, but still, I had to get to the hotel and I didn't even know where it was. I remember I looked up though, and suddenly I saw headlights that a car had pulled over to the side of the road behind me. It was several car lengths back, and at first I thought that maybe it was police. But looking at the headlights, it didn't really seem like a police car. Plus, there were no flashing red and blue lights, just normal headlights. I waited for a minute or two to see if anybody would get out or something. They didn't though. Then I decided to merge back onto this quiet road. There were literally no other cars around, just us 2 cars pulled over on the side of the road right here. It was really strange. I didn't know why this person had pulled over, and on both sides of the road it was just wildland and woods. So I put my car in drive and slowly went back out onto the road. When I did, I noticed that almost immediately after me, the car behind me did the same. This gave me a bad feeling. Why would this person want to follow me? I should have turned around and went back to the highway right then and there, but I didn't. The fact that the car behind me left right after me got me distracted. I kept going down that road for a little while, and at the first opportunity to turn that I had, I took it. I wanted to see what the car would do behind me. When I turned, the car did as well. Now I was really worried. I drove down this other random road for a while, and then I turned again. The car behind me did that as well. I really wanted to get away from it. This road was even more secluded though. There were no street lights, and the only visibility was coming from my headlights and the ones of the car following me. I knew that I had to turn around and go back to the highway. It felt really sketchy trying to get away from this guy on these roads, so I decided to make a U-turn. I slowed down and went as far as I could to the right side of the road. The car behind me started to slow down as well. Then I began turning around to make the U-turn. I slowed down significantly more, but I was just able to make it. However, when I turned around, I realized that the car behind me had actually backed up. It was now parked in a way where the car was blocking almost the entire width of the road. I stopped. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't think I would be able to get around the car. Then the car turned off and I saw the driver's door open up. A man got out. He did not look friendly at all. He started instantly jogging towards my driver's side door. In an instant, I went to the right and just hit the gas. It was really just a reaction to the guy running at me. I drove right into the grass and just barely squeaked around the man's car. Luckily, my car did not get stuck in the grass, and I soon went back onto the road. I saw the guy was running back for his car, so I went faster, and as soon as I made it to the next turn, I took it. Then I took this other road that was right off of that one. I knew the guy would be coming for me, but at the moment I could not see him. So I went down that road a little ways, and then I pulled over and turned my lights off. I just hoped that the guy wouldn't go down that road. I waited for probably 10 minutes, and I didn't see the car. So he must have not known that I had went down that second road. After that, I carefully drove back towards the highway again. I was able to make it, and then I was able to use the signs to get to the correct exit. I stopped at a gas station, bought a new charger, and then was able to make it to my hotel. Looking back, I don't know who that guy was, why he followed me, or what he wanted. I don't think it was anything good though, and I'm really glad that I got away from him. I'm a female, and I went to a college that was really far away from where I was from. It was several states away, and every time I went to and from college, it would be a bit of a road trip. One time in particular, I was coming home for the summer. It was a 10-hour drive, and there were actually a couple of times where I did the whole drive in one day, but this time I was going to be making it in 2. I was going to stop at a hotel when it got really late. So that first day, I drove for a really long time until it got late and I couldn't go any further. I was really tired, and it was probably like 11 o'clock. I was still a good 4 hours or so from home, so I decided to stop for some sleep. First though, I went to a gas station. It was a larger one that was probably very common for people on road trips to stop at. There were quite a few trucks parked in the back for the night. I had to use the restroom, so I parked and got out, then went inside of the store. There were a few other people inside, probably on road trips like me. I remember that after using the bathroom, I got an energy drink, and I saw that there was just one person working at the registers. There was a line of a few people waiting to check out. So I got in line, and then I remembered that this one guy got in line behind me. When he did, he tapped me on the shoulder and started talking to me. The guy had sort of long hair, was wearing a hat, and kind of had a gruff look to him. He was holding a 6-pack of natural light beer, and after saying hi to me, he asked if I was on a road trip. I said yes, I was going home from college. The man asked me where I was from, and I told him. Then, surprisingly, he asked me if I needed a ride. I said no, and I was confused, because I had literally just told him that I was on a road trip. He continued to talk to me though, asking me several more random questions before it was my turn to check out. After I did, I walked back to my car. I remember that when I got to my car, I noticed the man leaving the store with the beer and cigarettes as well. He walked to this blue, really rusty old pickup truck that was parked sort of far away from my car. I then started up my car to leave, but realized that I was sort of low on gas, so I decided to fill up now so I wouldn't have to do it in the morning. I backed up to an open gas pump and then fueled my car. Afterwards, I drove to a nearby motel. It was just this cheap motel, and it was a pretty short ways down the street. I arrived, checked in, and then got my room key and went to my room and got ready for bed. I remember that right before going to sleep, I decided to check out the front window. It was one of those motels that just has a sidewalk in front of the rooms and then the parking lot is right there. The window was completely covered, but when I moved the cover and I looked out, I saw the rusty blue truck. It was parked just in the parking lot in front of my room. Then I noticed that the same guy was in the driver's seat of it. Maybe this was just a coincidence, but it seemed a little bit strange. I went away from the window, got in bed, and then tried falling asleep. I was pretty tired and was able to fall asleep pretty quickly. But sometime in the night, I woke up. I just remember that after I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was the sound of somebody trying to open the door to my room. I was suddenly wide awake. The person tried the door a few times and then stopped. After not hearing anything for a few moments, I got up and went over to the door. I looked through the peephole but saw nothing. But I did hear a car door closing a distance away in the parking lot, so I went over and looked out of the window. When I did, I saw that nobody was at the door anymore. Then I looked to the blue truck and saw that the man was inside of it and in the driver's seat. That had to have been him. If he had a room here, why wouldn't he be in it? I went over to the phone in the motel room and I called the front desk, but nobody answered. I was considering calling the police. I went over to the bed and sat down, trying to relax. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning by now. After laying down and going on my phone a little bit, I was starting to feel better. Then, suddenly, I heard a knock at the door. Once again, I was instantly on edge. I listened, and after a few moments, whoever was there knocked again. I quietly got up and walked over to the door. After looking through the peephole, I saw the same man was there. Then I went back over to the bed and called the police. I told them what was going on. After I was told they were on the way, I hadn't heard the knocking or anything in a few minutes. I went back over to the window and looked out. The man was still there and still inside of his truck. Then I just had to wait for police. I kept watching out the window the entire time. After about 5 minutes or so, I saw a police car entering the parking lot. Right when it did, the truck that the man was in started up and began to drive away. The police car noticed this and put on its flashing lights. They both then drove out of my sight. However, about 10 minutes later, another police officer showed up and knocked on my door. He told me that the police had pursued the rusty truck and stopped it. The man was arrested for drunk driving, as well as having other drugs in the car. He denied trying to enter my room, but admitted to knocking on the door. I was just glad that he was off the streets for the night. The next morning, I was able to make it back home. That was definitely my scariest road trip experience. A few years back, I went on a road trip. I travel quite a bit for work, and I end up driving all around the country. So on this particular road trip, I found myself driving in sort of the middle of nowhere really late at night. I'm pretty good at staying awake and driving at all kinds of hours, but I need the help of caffeine to do so. So when I sensed that I was starting to get a little bit sleepy, I knew that I needed to stop. If I got out of the car, walked around a little, and had a caffeinated beverage, I would be fine. So after driving down the highway for a few more miles, I saw the sign for a rest stop up ahead. I was happy to see this, and I pulled off. This rest stop was right off the highway, and I mean literally right off of it. The exit went right into the parking lot, and then you had to go back onto the highway. There were no other roads. There was also a small woods in the area of land between the stop and the highway. When I pulled in, I noticed that there were 0 other cars around. The rest stop building was also fairly small. I parked my car right in front of the building, got out, and looked around. It was really dark, but there was one dim street lamp a little ways away. Around the building was a little bit of open grass, and then woods on basically all sides of it. The cool air outside felt refreshing, and after stretching my legs, I walked inside of the rest stop. It was an older building. Inside, there was a small lobby with a vending machine and some maps. The restrooms were straight ahead, and then to the right, there was what appeared to be an old restaurant. It was one of those small pizza places that you would sometimes see in rest stops or travel centers, but it was now abandoned, and it looked like it had been for several years. It was sort of spooky. After briefly looking around inside, I figured that I would get something from the vending machine, but first I went into the restroom and used it. While I was in there, I heard footsteps outside in the lobby of the rest stop building. I figured somebody else had stopped. The person did not enter the restroom though. When I came out of the restroom like 30 seconds later, I didn't see anybody. I went over to the vending machine, got a drink, and then casually walked around a little. I looked out the window and then noticed that my car was still the only one in the entire parking lot. This was strange. I was sure that I heard somebody else inside the building, but where would they have come from? I walked over to the abandoned restaurant, and when I did, I thought I saw somebody moving quickly behind the old counter. It was really dark over there, so I didn't see well. But if somebody was over there and seemingly hiding, I didn't want to get involved. I decided at that point to just leave. So I turned and I started walking for the doors. When I was almost there though, I heard footsteps behind me, like whoever was back there was now leaving as well. After I got out of the doors and was approaching my car, I heard the person leave as well, and they seemed to be moving quickly. I stopped and turned around to look at them. It was a man. He was pretty thin, but kind of tall. He was really creepy looking and had long stringy hair. The guy was headed right towards me and approaching in a really aggressive way. I wouldn't be able to get inside my car on time before he reached me, so I decided to just run. I turned and I just sprinted through the parking lot. I ran all the way to the other side. At first, the guy started chasing after me, but he soon stopped. When I got to the far end of the parking lot, I turned around and I looked. The man was standing right next to my car. I couldn't go back to it. I kept walking, and then I went into the grass. Then I entered the woods. I just wanted to get out of the guy's view. After walking through the thick woods for a little while, I called 911. After speaking with the operator, I told him my location and what was going on. Then I waited. I could not see the guy from where I was because I was that deep in the woods. Finally, I could sort of see flashing red and blue lights. I came out from the woods and I saw a police car next to my car. An officer left his vehicle and started walking behind the building. After a while, he came back over to me. He said that when he got there, he thought he saw somebody running behind the building. He went back there though and couldn't find the person. He figured they were deep in the woods by then. I talked to him about the situation. He said that he would call another nearby unit and they would check behind the building again, but that I could go. So after that, I was on my way. I'm not sure if the police found the man or not. I'm guessing that he was going to try to steal my car, but who knows? I'm really glad that I got away from him.